Ex-wife cheated, got an STD, and now she's desperate for help after I became rich and successful. You've emerged victorious while I've suffered defeat. You walk away with property, money, and an upgraded partner. The hotel room is yours tonight, along with the arrangements I've made. Please don't return the gift. It would only remind you of your deceit. I'm driving home and have no desire to see you, him, or your associates again. Let me know when your team will collect your belongings. Anything unnecessary will be packed away, symbolizing the mess of our marriage. To quote my father in the Air Force, yay for me and screw you. I'm done serving you. Enjoy your journey. Your acting skills have earned it. 10 years later on a Wednesday morning, I awoke to banging. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I checked the clock. 8:15 a.m. The noise persisted now at my front door. Who would knock at this hour? I slipped into my robe and slippers, heading downstairs where the knocking grew louder. Peering through the peephole, I saw a disheveled woman. Opening the door, prepared to scold her, I recognized her, older, thinner, her once vibrant hair now tinged with gray. She smelled, her dress worn. She resembled homeless Daisy, who often lurked in the streets or underpasses. In disbelief, I questioned the woman who had once been my wife. "Yes, Mike, it's me. Can I come inside?" she pleaded desperately. "By the way, that's me, Mike Carpenter." "No," I replied, slamming the door in her face. Just then, another knock echoed, accompanied by her sobs. "Please, Mike, I'm begging you, open the door." I flung the door open to prevent further pounding, but remained in the doorway to block her entry. The neighbors already viewed me as peculiar. I didn't want to attract more attention by making a scene on the doorstep. "What do you want?" "I made it clear 10 years ago that I never want to see you again." "Never? What part of that didn't you understand?" "And why are you here?" "I thought you and Dr. Wonderful were living in Milwaukee." Regaining composure, Daisy wiped her tears and cast me the most longing glance I'd ever witnessed. "Can I come in? I'm hungry, tired, and need to use the restroom." "Please, I'll explain later," she implored, her feet shifting uneasily. With my experience as a teacher, I recognized the telltale signs of imminent urgency. I didn't want her relieving herself on my porch, so I reluctantly swung the door open, gesturing her inside with a silent invitation. "You remember where the bathroom is?" I scolded, a reminder that we once shared this home. "Hurry up." "Thanks," Daisy said, entering. She dropped her suitcase and dashed to the downstairs bathroom. I closed the door, went upstairs for a quick bathroom break, and returned downstairs, finding her still in the bathroom. I went to the kitchen, fired up my Keurig, and brewed coffee. By then, Daisy had returned. "Can I have a cup?" she pleaded. I paused. Torn between anger and restraint. I couldn't slap a woman, and I didn't want trouble. "Yeah, I'm not heartless," I replied, "but I'm not your servant either." So I relented, partly out of curiosity. "I don't have fancy stuff," I said, offering milk and sugar. "Black's fine," Daisy said gratefully. I handed her the cup, watching her trembling hands. "Why are you here?" I asked. "I've got nowhere else to go," she finally admitted. "I used up my last dime on cab fare." "What happened to your beloved Dr. Bruce?" I quipped sarcastically. "Dr. Bruce?" "It fell apart," she stuttered, avoiding my gaze. If my sarcasm had been any sharper, you could have sliced tile with it. I noticed her flinch. After the divorce, we tied the knot, but things soured when Bruce faced a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. Both of us lost our jobs and medical licenses, and we ended up losing everything. Bruce became abusive, blaming me for our situation. "One day I caught him cheating," Daisy tearfully recounted. "So he got a taste of his own medicine," I remarked wryly, remembering our own past drama. "But karma's a kicker, not fun." Daisy whimpered. "Just like it wasn't funny when you publicly tore me apart on our anniversary." I reminded her. "Do you realize it's the 10th anniversary of that night?" "No, I didn't know," Daisy murmured. "Did you report him to the cops?" I asked, showing some compassion. "No, too scared. But I did divorce him. Unfortunately, I was left with next to nothing after the split," Daisy explained. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." "What's your play here?" I questioned. "Sympathy? You might find it in the dictionary between crap and chiropractor." "I despise you. I loathe you as intensely as I once adored you," I snarled. "Now that your world's crumbling, you come crawling back to me. Where are your parents and friends now?" "They've all abandoned me," Daisy sobbed. "No surprises there," I scoffed bitterly. "Did you and the idiot have kids?" "No, never did. Turns out Bruce is infertile. For some reason he blames me for that too," she spat bitterly. "At least the gene pool's safe from you two," I remarked wryly. "Guess something good came from that mess." She wrinkled her nose at me. "What happened to you, Mike? You used to be so caring, so kind." Anger morphed into fury and I squeezed my eyes shut. "You want to know what happened? Look in the mirror. You happened. Thanks to you, I'm incapable of love and trust." "The nice guy finished last," I growled. But I thought you'd move on, find someone else, Daisy wheezed wide-eyed. Get real. After what you did, you never once hinted I was just a fallback for you. I thought we had something solid, but you lied. 13 damn years, 10 as husband and wife. Do you think I can trust anyone after that? I took a deep breath. And how many women do you think would want damaged goods? Not that there was a line, I muttered to myself. Still, not a single one came along. So, are you surprised I've turned into a recluse after a decade of licking my wounds? I suppose not, Daisy admitted sheepishly, lowering her gaze. And here you are. What do you want from me, shelter? Care while you wait for Prince Charming to stroll back in? I hoped you'd let me stay just until I get back on my feet, she pleaded. There's a shelter downtown, I pointed out. That's what they're for. That's where my taxes go, to keep people like you off the streets. I tried, but they were full, Daisy confessed. Even the YWCA and the big church downtown had no room. Please, Mike, I'm begging you. I'll do anything, cook, clean, whatever you need. I wanted to lash out, but I held back, glaring at her. She visibly recoiled. What makes you think I'd want you near me? To me, you're contaminated, a walking hazard, I hissed. And then it dawned on me. You've been attempting to sell yourself, I remarked. She lowered her head shyly, tears dripping onto the table as she nodded. How do I appear? No takers, she questioned. I studied her closely before replying. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Perhaps I should depart. Perhaps I should simply fade away and perish in some, Daisy cried. No one desires me anyhow. I watched her sobbing at the kitchen table, feeling a mix of anger and pity. Despite my strong hatred for her, seeing her like this after all these years was jarring. And then there was Bruce, the dirtbag who had taken her from me to mistreat her. My contempt for him was growing. Raised never to use violence against women, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Taking a reluctant breath, I suggested we eat first. Daisy agreed, expressing her hunger. I prepared scrambled eggs and bacon, recalling how Daisy used to make them. Her eyes lit up when I served her, grateful for the cheese on the eggs. As she ate voraciously, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. When she finished, she thanked me for the meal and praised my cooking. She declined more food but asked for another cup of coffee. Sure, I replied, taking her cup. When I returned, she sipped her coffee and seemed to feel better, a little. The food helped, she admitted. Good. The shower might help more, I suggested bluntly. No offense, but you stink. Daisy's face fell. I'm sorry, can I use your shower, please? You know where it is, I said. Towels are where they always are. My robe will be on the door. Don't put it back on after your shower. You can use the washer and dryer for your clothes. As she disappeared into the bathroom, I grumbled about cleaning, then washed dishes, went upstairs to get ready, and reflected on Daisy's departure with Bruce, the betrayal that devastated me. Counseling helped, and I poured my feelings into writing, eventually publishing a book about my experience, bringing some closure. Another factor in maintaining my sanity was my involvement in martial arts. Initially, two senseis urged me to quit due to my intensity during sparring. However, I found guidance from a retired Marine at the community center. Unlike others, he remained composed during our sessions, teaching me to channel my emotions into controlled strikes rather than letting them dictate my actions. It was a challenging skill to master, as evidenced by the bruises I accumulated. Meeting Daisy again took me by surprise, especially seeing her health decline. I wondered if she was sick. Oddly, my anger shifted toward Bruce. Even though I initially wanted to push Daisy away, I hesitated. What if something happened to her? Could I handle the aftermath? The idea of worsening my emotional state and facing potential legal issues wasn't appealing. I decided to get another perspective and called my mom. Morning, Mike, she greeted cheerfully. What's on your mind? Skipping the usual chit-chat, I blurted out, guess who showed up this morning? Now you got me curious. Who? She asked. Daisy, I confessed. I heard her sigh. What's the deal? What does she want? She probed. I recounted Daisy's situation and what she told me. Mom, she looks awful. My gut says I should kick her out, but... You'd regret it if something happened to her, Mom predicted, echoing my worry. Yeah, you're probably right. Plus, she treated Bruce terribly, I added. I know she hurt you deeply, Mom acknowledged, but maybe hearing her out is the wise move. How about I come over later? Knowing Mom's talent for unraveling things, I agreed. Sounds good, Mom. Your input would be invaluable. Let me handle it for now, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, Mom. I really appreciate it, I expressed gratefully. We wrapped up our chat, and I tended to my chores. Slipping into my usual summer gear of a tee and jeans, I went downstairs. Daisy had already started laundry, wearing my old robe and slippers as she waited for me in the living room. I didn't bother to check if she had anything on underneath. The robe was tightly tied, showing dark stains on her legs. Though she smelled better, she didn't look any better. Want a coffee refill? I offered. Yes, please, she accepted. Pouring another cup, I joined her as she sipped. Her shaky hands caught my eye. Thanks, she mumbled. I'll leave once my clothes are done, she added. No hurry, I assured her. I do have some questions if you don't mind, I continued. Sure, Daisy agreed. Bruce faced malpractice claims. Weren't doctors like him insured? I asked. They were, but it turned into a class action. Even though most claims were baseless, the insurance refused coverage due to many judgments against him, Daisy clarified. Some claims were proven true? I probed. The unproven ones were dismissed due to lack of evidence, she explained. But the damage was done. We lost our jobs and licenses. Didn't you have 401ks? I questioned. Surprised. Yes, we did. We lived off them for a year, paying hefty penalties, but we lost everything, Daisy lamented. What's Bruce doing now? I chuckled, recalling his earlier dreams. He works as a parking attendant, making about $16 an hour, she revealed. And your plans? I redirected. I thought about office work in the medical field. Despite losing my nursing license, I'm hopeful, Daisy replied quietly. Best of luck, I offered. Transportation and housing, I pressed. I can take the bus or walk, she sighed. I'll figure something out, but it takes money, she acknowledged. And you don't have any, I noted. Expected me to support you until you bounce back, huh? I took a gamble with the question. Yes, Daisy admitted. I get I'm not owed anything, but I hoped, given what I sacrificed in the divorce, you might show some kindness. My infatuation blinded me to your struggles. Now I see assuming was a mistake. You're right, I don't owe you, I affirmed. She seemed defeated, but I sighed and added, but I'm not heartless. You clearly need help. My mom's on her way. She wants to talk before I decide. Of course, Daisy replied, visibly relieved. Your mom's always meant a lot to me and she adored you, I noted. Then, unexpectedly, she said, despite it all, Mom still cared for you. Cared? Daisy asked, surprised. Yes. So you need to be brutally honest with her, understand? I do, I promise, honesty, Daisy assured. And Mike? What? I asked. Thank you, genuinely, for everything, Daisy expressed. Hold off on the thanks, I cautioned. Just then, the doorbell rang. I peeked through the peephole, seeing my mom, so I greeted her with a hug as I let her in. Daisy, goodness, has it really been 10 years? My mom exclaimed, spotting Daisy in my old robe. Both women hugged and exchanged kisses. It's nice to see you again, Lorraine, Daisy replied. Mike, dear, why don't you give us some girl time? My mom suggested. Knowing she wanted privacy, I headed to my home office, closing the door. I surfed the web, looking into the malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Bruce Williams. After some searching, I stumbled upon troubling information. Bruce had reportedly diagnosed around 97% of his 2,000 patients with epilepsy over 4 years. However, many children were misdiagnosed or over-medicated, leading to unnecessary treatments and procedures. Daisy was often implicated as an accomplice. The hospital had to refund $300,000 for improper billing, prompting their termination and license revocation. Reading this, I was appalled. Bruce seemed to be the ringleader, with Daisy following his lead. My mother interrupted, expressing concern about Daisy's health and suggesting a visit to Dr. McGregor. Her grave tone weighed heavily on me. Terry McGregor had been our family doctor for years, and Mom had worked for him until retiring recently. Why, Mom? I pondered. I can't diagnose, but I've seen many cancer cases in women. I bet she needs urgent medical attention, but she didn't stop there. I know Daisy has strained your bond, and I understand, Mom admitted. But if she's dealing with health issues, we should help. It's the right thing. She gave me a small, lopsided smile. I never said being a Christian was easy, did I? Plus, Michael James Carpenter, your father and I didn't raise you to be cold-hearted, did we? I wrinkled my nose, returning her smile, and shook my head. So, she went on, I called Dr. McGregor. He'll see her today and run tests. If they find anything, they'll refer her to a specialist and assist with Medicaid. She'll change, and I'll drive her, Mom decided. You can't afford that, I objected. Here, take this. I handed her 2 $100 bills. Thanks, Mike. You're a good son, she acknowledged. Just so we're clear, I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it because of the values you taught me. That doesn't mean I forgive her or take her back, I asserted firmly. Got it, Mom replied quietly. An awkward silence hung in the air. Did she mention that idiot Bruce assaulted her? I finally asked. Yes, she did, Mom confirmed, her face neutral, her voice steady. I nodded briskly. That scoundrel needs consequences, I thought. Another tense silence followed. "Keep me updated," I instructed. "I will," Mom assured, kissing my forehead before leaving. Exiting my office, I saw Daisy in a different outfit, still worn but clean. "Thanks for breakfast," she murmured timidly. "You're welcome," I replied stiffly. After they left, I locked up and grabbed more coffee, researching Wisconsin's laws on spousal abuse. Sadly, I found the time limit for prosecution was discouraging. Unsure of when Bruce attacked Daisy, I doubted the authorities could act. Feeling frustrated, I briefly considered taking matters into my own hands. To clear my head, I changed and rode my stationary bike, pushing myself through a tough workout. Over the years, I had gone from unfit to fit, sticking to a regular exercise routine. Afterward, feeling refreshed, I showered, dressed, and had a light lunch while catching up on the news. By the time I listened to Mom's message, it was mid-afternoon. "Was wondering where you guys were," I said as I answered the phone. "Just finished with Dr. McGregor," Mom replied wearily. Judging by her tone, Daisy wasn't nearby. "Any updates?" I asked. "McGregor's concerned about Daisy. Test results suggest cervical cancer. He's arranged an appointment with an oncologist for Friday. She's applied for Medicaid and emergency aid. McGregor also suspects physical abuse," Mom disclosed. "We're aware," I acknowledged. She mentioned not eating. Mom continued, her concern evident. "But McGregor thinks it's more severe, lacking essential nutrients." Seeing her worry, I nodded. "It's late. I'll take her for a meal. Grab essentials in her suitcase. She should stay with me. We need to talk," Mom suggested. "Sounds like a plan," I agreed. "Keep me posted." "Love you," Mom said. "Love you too," I replied. About 3 hours later, they were on their way. We settled in the study while Daisy packed. "Sorry for the delay," Mom began. "No worries," I said. "What's the plan?" "Caring for Daisy till her appointment. She still cares for you." "Wanted you to know," Mom explained. "No reconciliation, not after her lies and infidelity," I said firmly. "Understood," Mom replied. "She thinks she can win you back," Mom revealed. "Out of the question," I asserted. "Besides, I've changed." "I miss the old you," Mom admitted. "Can you join us for dinner on Friday?" she asked. "I'll make lasagna." "Absolutely," I agreed. "Your lasagna always brings a smile." We hugged and returned to the front room where Daisy was waiting with her suitcase. "I'll stay with your mom, if that's okay," she said weakly. "That's up to her," I replied, noticing my mom's expression. "Thanks for breakfast and for listening," Daisy said tearfully. "You're welcome," I nodded. "Don't forget about dinner on Friday," my mom reminded unnecessarily. "I'll be there, I promise," I assured her. Over the next 2 days, I kept busy with work and household chores. With school out for summer, I had to tackle curriculum planning and home maintenance. I trusted my mom to take care of Daisy, knowing her resourcefulness in navigating challenges. Finally, Friday arrived. After a shower, I picked up wine and headed to my mom's for lasagna. Arriving at 6:15, Daisy greeted me and led me inside. Mom was busy in the kitchen, and Daisy appeared on the verge of tears. I thanked Daisy as I entered the kitchen, and Mom's face lit up at the sight of the wine. We sat down to enjoy the meal, though Daisy seemed visibly distressed. "How did things go today?" I finally inquired. "We managed to get Daisy's application approved," Mom reported. "Thank goodness for this newfangled internet system. I wish they'd had it when I retired." Observing her forced optimism, I sought reassurance. "So Daisy's medical costs will be covered?" "Yes, and she'll get a monthly allowance from the state. Since she'll be living here, she won't need much," Mom confirmed. "They're pursuing child support, but it's like squeezing blood from a turnip," I muttered grimly. "That's good," I replied. "And the oncologist?" Daisy's expression darkened, signaling ominous news. "They found stage 4 cervical cancer," Mom disclosed. "It's spreading rapidly throughout her body." "Can it be treated?" I asked, grappling with mixed emotions. "Maybe," Mom responded cautiously, with Daisy's consent. They continued. "Survival odds are less than 20%. Treatment's an option, but no guarantees," Mom explained. "Doctors think it started out 4 years ago," Daisy admitted tearfully. "If caught. Earlier, my chances would have been over 90%. "That's terrible. Bruce didn't notice anything," I probed. "No, he never mentioned it," Daisy explained. "I noticed some changes, but I didn't want to worry him." "What kind of changes?" I asked delicately. "Closeness became painful," Daisy confessed. "We stopped altogether for a while." Redirecting the conversation, I said, "New medications might help." "Yes," Mom added. "They could improve her odds by 10 or 15%. "What's your plan?" I asked Daisy. "Fight. I'm not ready to give up," she declared. "And how long will treatment last?" I questioned Mom. "Up to a year, maybe longer," she replied. "Will Daisy stay here?" I pressed. "I think it's best. I'll care for her," Mom assured. Reluctantly, I agreed. I suppose that makes sense. Can you handle this? Mom asked. I glanced at Daisy, recalling our history. Memories flooded back of her callous actions with Bruce. Daisy noticed my change in demeanor. I know you don't trust me, but, she started. Understatement, I sharply interjected. If you injure my mother or cause trouble, I'll kick you out, cancer or not. Understand? Yes, Daisy replied quietly, tears welling. Mom intervened, suggesting dessert. I can help, I offered, but Mom declined. You two could use some time alone, she said, leaving. Daisy wiped her face. I started reading your book, she said. Was I that terrible? I have footage from that night, I revealed. Would you like to see it? Daisy declined, stunned. No wonder you despise me, she said, sobbing. It's all in the book, I continued. I imagined revenge for years. Daisy was horrified. Yolanda suggested exercise, Mom added, bringing apple pie. That's why you look so good now? Daisy asked. Yes, I confirmed. I've been doing martial arts and fitness. But you're still angry, Daisy observed. It's better, Mom reassured. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have even come through the door. I'm truly sorry, Mike. I really am. I knew it would hurt, but I didn't anticipate it would devastate you like this. That's why I gave you everything in the divorce. I thought it would aid in your recovery. When you didn't contest it, I assumed you'd be all right, Daisy explained. To be honest, my lawyer was taken aback when he saw your petition. He urged me to sign it swiftly, fearing you might reconsider, I confessed. Have you dated anyone since then? Daisy asked tentatively. Not really, I replied bluntly. Just a couple of drunken one-night stands, but that's about it. I don't even recall their names. I noticed my mother's eyebrows shoot up, a look of disgust crossing her face, but she held back her thoughts. At that moment, I didn't care about her reaction. Oh God, Daisy sighed. I don't know what to say. A sorry won't be enough, will it? No, I replied bitterly. We ate pie in silence, Daisy's hurt evident, and I avoided. Looking at Mom's face. After saying goodbye, Mom walked me to the door where I spoke quietly. Are you sure you're doing the right thing, Mom? I asked. What about her family? Can't they help? I called her parents and sister, but they refused to help, Mom replied sadly. What a screwed up family, I muttered. You didn't abandon me, I told Mom. Despite turning bitter, family takes care of family. I agree, Mom said tearfully. What are Daisy's chances really? I asked. Mom looked at Daisy before answering. It's hard to say. Progress has been made in treatment, but it's uncertain. A lot depends on her will to live. Ignoring that, I expressed concern for my mom's well-being. What if she does something behind your back? I worried. I know you don't trust her, but she's at rock bottom right now. People with nothing have nothing to lose, I reasoned. Be careful. If you need anything, let me know, I urged. I will, Mom promised. Thanks for dinner. I'll be in touch. Love you, I said. Love you too, son, Mom replied, kissing my cheek. Please try to keep your emotions in check, Mom requested. Don't push her further, she pleaded. I'll try, I sighed heavily. That's all I ask, Mom said, and I promise not to play matchmaker. Thank you, I smiled before leaving. The next 2 months flew by as I tackled home projects and prepared for the upcoming school year. On Fridays, I visited my mom's house for dinner. I witnessed Daisy's chemotherapy taking a toll, weakening her. Despite the treatment's intent to heal, it seemed ineffective in her case. By mid-August, she lost all her hair, donning a stylish chemo cap. While my feelings for her remained unchanged, I made an effort to be polite, mainly for my mom's peace of mind. Daisy began receiving deductions from Bruce's paycheck, albeit small. She opened a bank account, with Mom overseeing the funds. Daisy insisted on sharing with Mom for expenses. Mom agreed, setting aside 10% for emergencies. On the eve of the new school year, I arrived at Mom's house to find an unfamiliar car parked outside. The sight of Bruce triggered an unsettling feeling. Mom and Daisy seemed apprehensive. Bruce appeared disheveled, a stark contrast to his former self. The restrained part of my mind reacted with restrained aggression. Observing Bruce's decline, he lacked his previous commanding presence, appearing unkempt in dirty jeans and a shirt. Well, look who it is, the arrogant teacher, Bruce sneered arrogantly. My animosity towards him had peaked. Though I'd never been in a physical altercation before, my martial arts training had taught me to avoid fights whenever possible. Even if you emerge victorious, the repercussions can linger for a lifetime. What's your business here, Bruce? I asked icily. I want the money that woman took from me, he growled. Took? I thought the court mandated a portion of your income for alimony, I stated evenly, though my gaze probably conveyed my disdain. It's all the same. They seized my funds and now I'm facing eviction because I can't pay rent, Bruce hissed. Thanks to her, you had the money to travel here from Milwaukee, I pointed out. You could have used it for rent. Don't play games, teacher. Maybe I should have taught you a lesson 10 years ago, he threatened. She stopped me, insisted I treat you with respect for looking after her all those years, Bruce threatened. How about you leave and we pretend none of this happened, I suggested cautiously, raising my hands in an attempt to defuse the situation that could lead to a violent confrontation, leaving me with bruises and a few well-timed counterattacks. But he likely didn't know Daisy's condition. She was ill, battling cancer, and she needed support. Cancer, huh? Is that another one of her lies? Bruce scoffed, placing his soda and sandwich aside before producing a revolver from behind him. Funny, I happen to have the cure for that, he taunted, aiming the weapon at Daisy. Bruce, please, my mom pleaded, gesturing towards her phone on the table. The emergency operator likely heard our entire exchange. Please, I've already called the police, they're on their way. I began to position myself between Bruce and Daisy, but he swiftly directed the weapon toward me. Desperation was evident in his eyes. Mentally, I retreated. I hadn't come this far, survived this much, to be senselessly shot by a cop. Stay put, teacher, not one move, Bruce warned, his hands trembling. In that instant, we spotted flashing red and blue lights outside the front window and heard a voice over the intercom. Mr. Williams, this is the police. The house is surrounded. We're aware you're armed. Drop your weapon and come out with your hands up, the officer instructed. You should listen, I warned Bruce, who stared wide-eyed. How did they know about my weapon? Bruce inquired. I informed them. I saw it tucked in your waistband, Mom disclosed. And Mike's right, follow their orders. This is your final chance, Mr. Williams. Surrender the weapon and exit the premises, the officer commanded through the speaker. Glancing at us, Bruce seemed to grow increasingly uneasy. Our eyes met briefly, and I noticed his resolve waver. If you were wise, you'd comply, I advised. There won't be another warning. As the back door opened, 2 officers suddenly appeared in the room, pistols drawn, aimed at Bruce. Drop your weapons, one ordered. Bruce turned, eyes widening as he realized he was facing 2 loaded weapons. Recklessly, he raised his firearm, but the officers fired first. Despite the ringing in my ears, Daisy's scream pierced through, shocking me. 2 more officers entered the room as my mom reacted, clutching an heirloom. Frozen, I watched as officers attended to Daisy and my wounded mom, while 2 others knelt beside Bruce. 1. Officer confirmed Bruce's death, leaving me shaken. Despite feeling a mix of relief and resentment, I steadied my mom. Paramedics arrived, determining Bruce's fate and attending to Daisy. I offered to accompany my mom to the hospital. At the crime scene, detectives took our statement and advised us to leave. They assured us of securing the house and provided a cleaning service recommendation. Driving to the hospital, my mind spun with conflicting emotions. At the hospital, we navigated bureaucracy, eventually settling in the waiting area for Daisy's surgery. Finally, the doors parted and a doctor approached us. Mrs. Carpenter, he inquired. Yes, that's me, Mom confirmed. How's Daisy? Miss Williams is stable and improving. I anticipate she'll pull through the gunshot wound. Fortunately, the bullet passed through without hitting any critical organs. She's fortunate, the doctor informed us. Just a tad to the left, and it could have been fatal. Thank the Lord, Mom breathed a sigh of relief. She's lost considerable blood, and her compromised state due to cancer and chemotherapy isn't in her favor. However, we've detected something else and informed her oncologist, the doctor disclosed. Oh? What's that? Mom inquired. I'm aware she's undergoing chemotherapy, but we've detected what seems to be signs of infection in her system. I've ordered a battery of tests as a precaution, he explained. Oh dear, Mom sighed. Will she be all right? It's too early to say. She's currently sedated. We'll need to keep her here for a minimum of 3 days. May we visit her? Mom requested. I'm afraid not. Perhaps tomorrow morning at the earliest. Let me provide you with a card. You can reach this number anytime for updates and to learn her room assignment, he said, handing Mom the card. We drove back to Mom's house in silence, with her crying most of the way. My thoughts were consumed by the surreal situation. Daisy, whom I once harbored dark fantasies about, was now fighting for her life in the hospital. Despite feeling a pang of remorse, I pushed the thoughts aside. Arriving home, I noticed the crime scene tape discarded in the trash, and a note from the detective declaring the scene cleared. Mom wasted no time in cleaning up, while I disposed of the chair Daisy had been shot in. Upon my return, I found Mom on her knees, tears mixing with the blood as she scrubbed the floor. Offering help, she declined, determined to manage alone. I suggested she stay at my place, but she insisted on staying. Respecting her decision, I resolved to stay with her despite her protestations. I offered to cook dinner before we turned in. Sharing a knowing look, we agreed a glass of wine would be a fitting end to a tumultuous day. As she resumed cleaning, her movements became more frantic. Concerned about potential nightmares, we found solace in a glass of wine or sheer exhaustion, sleeping deeply until morning. We moved through the house quietly until the phone interrupted our somber atmosphere around 10. I retreated to the kitchen to give her privacy, and when she joined me minutes later, she relayed Daisy's condition, serious but stable, undergoing tests with an expected return to her room by mid-afternoon. Lost in thought, I barely registered any emotions. She interrupted my introspection, requesting a ride to the hospital at 2:30. I agreed, departing early to handle errands before meeting her at her house and proceeding to the hospital. After purchasing gifts for Daisy, including her favorite flowers and a book, Mom teased me playfully at the register, prompting me to defensively brush off any deeper sentiment. But her words lingered, reminding me that feelings, even complex ones, were valid. Afterward, we headed to Daisy's room. Though awake, she appeared drained. Mom planted a kiss on her cheek and passed her the purchased card. Her eyes sparkled when she noticed the flowers. "My favorites! You remembered!" she exclaimed, surprised. Her voice, though weak, held a pleasant tone. "Yes," I responded, extending the novel. "If I recall correctly, you were reading it when you left with Bruce," I added, my voice devoid of emotion, though a slight pang hit my gut. "Yes, I did read it, but never got to finish." "Thank you," she murmured softly, not meeting my gaze as she thumbed through the paperback. "Any updates?" Mom inquired. "Not yet," Daisy answered, shaking her head. She closed the book but held on to it tightly as if it were a cherished possession, nestling into it like a teddy bear. She added, "They said I probably won't hear anything for at least a day." "That's okay," Mom agreed. Then the nurse chimed in. "How are you feeling?" "Terrible," Daisy groaned. "I'm exhausted, my side and stomach ache." "They'll figure it out," Mom comforted. "And Bruce?" Daisy inquired, still avoiding my gaze. "He was pronounced dead at the scene," Mom informed her. "Good," Daisy stated firmly, finally showing some strength. "I'm glad he's dead." Mom's expression darkened, but she remained silent, gently patting Daisy's hand and nodding in understanding. I stayed quiet while the women conversed. Hearing my ex-wife denounce Bruce eased some of the pent-up animosity, yet it couldn't erase a decade of bitterness. A nurse entered, checking Daisy's vital signs and administering medication. "Time for your meds, Daisy," the nurse said, handing her a cup of pills. Daisy swallowed them with water, expressing exhaustion. "Call me Daisy," she requested, showing resilience despite her weariness. "I'll inform the staff," the nurse said, suggesting rest for Daisy. Mom inquired about test results, and the nurse assured they'd have news by tomorrow morning. After exchanging farewells, I noticed Daisy's longing glance as we left. I offered a faint smile before closing the door. After dropping off my mom, I returned home to tackle my weekend tasks. The following morning, we convened in Daisy's hospital room. Mom, a part-time volunteer, had arrived a couple of hours earlier. Soon after my arrival, 2 doctors entered. I was introduced to Dr. Samuels, Daisy's surgeon, and Dr. Kincaid, her oncologist. Though they tried to appear assured, their concern was palpable. "What's the update?" I inquired, eager for positive news despite their demeanor. Dr. Kincaid responded first. "Miss Williams is grappling with both peritonitis and diverticulitis, which can account for some of the symptoms you've mentioned previously." Dr. Samuels elaborated. "Mrs. Carpenter," he addressed my mom, taking over the report, "our scans have detected several large pockets of infection in Daisy's abdomen. Furthermore, we suspect her gallbladder is perforated and will need to be removed." "How did this occur?" I inquired, feeling my mom's hand tighten around mine. "There are likely multiple factors, but it appears she had an underlying condition exacerbated by cancer and chemotherapy medications," Dr. Kincaid responded. "What's the next step?" my mom asked softly. "She will eventually require surgery to eradicate the infection and repair the damage, but we'd like to allow her body more time to recover from the recent surgery she underwent. So, we'll keep her here on antibiotics for the next couple of weeks to monitor if the infection subsides naturally. Chemotherapy will be paused during this period," Dr. Samuels explained. "What are her odds?" I asked, striving to maintain composure. The doctors exchanged glances before replying. I didn't like the gravity in their expressions. "I won't sugarcoat it," Dr. Samuels began. "Without surgery, her prospects are grim. Her body is currently delicately balanced. Administering high doses of antibiotics could potentially disrupt her metabolism and further weaken her, potentially even leading to a fatal outcome. Although the current antibiotic regimen seems to have halted the infection spread and is gradually reducing it, it won't mend the damage. While there's no visible perforation in the bowel wall, she was likely on the brink of it when we intervened. Exploratory surgery aimed at identifying unseen issues carries significant risks at this point. Manipulating the intestines could inadvertently worsen the situation. Our goal is to cleanse the intestines of infection and mend any damage. She must be robust enough to endure surgery and chemotherapy afterward. Malnutrition has severely debilitated her, and she won't withstand chemotherapy until the infections are eradicated and her other bodily functions normalize. Peritonitis alone poses a grave threat, and coupled with cancer, he trailed off with a shrug. The surgery itself poses significant risks, Dr. Kincaid interjected. Very significant, considering the extent of infection in her abdomen and the damage to her internal organs. Her chances of survival are estimated to be between 30 and 40%. So without surgery, my chances are slim to none, queried Daisy solemnly. Though her eyes were wide and she appeared to be sweating, her voice remained steady. Unfortunately, that appears to be the case, confirmed Dr. Kincaid. However, once you recover from the surgery, you should be able to proceed with chemotherapy without complications. In that case, it seems we have no alternative but to proceed with the surgery, Daisy conceded weakly, sinking back onto the bed. Very well. We'll organize everything accordingly, declared Dr. Samuels. With their departure, Daisy broke into tears. Her mother embraced her, offering solace. Don't fret, Daisy. You have the finest medical team in the hospital on your side. Everything will work out, she reassured Daisy amid her sobs. I had much to contend with, and this wasn't the place for it. It was odd. Not long ago, I might have welcomed news of Daisy's demise, but now my emotions were in turmoil. I have to head out. School starts tomorrow, but I'll check in on you from time to time, I offered. Yeah, I'd appreciate that, Mike, Daisy exclaimed. Mom smiled at me. We left the room and I walked her to her car, waving as she drove away. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept my promise, visiting Daisy several times. We discussed various topics, from my teaching and students to her failed marriage with Bruce and our own failed marriage. We also delved into our emotions and the events that led us here. During one visit, I brought up her family. I'm curious, I began. What? Daisy asked. What's the deal with your family? Why do they dislike you so much? Mom reached out to them, but they want nothing to do with you. Remember when I mentioned they disowned me after the lawsuit? Daisy recalled. Yes, I remember, I replied. What I didn't tell you is they knew about Bruce from the start. They agreed to keep you in the dark, and in return, Bruce promised to support them in retirement. He even offered to buy them cruise tickets. And you and your sister knew about this? I asked, feeling anger rising. Daisy looked down in shame. Yes, she whispered before meeting my gaze again. It was another betrayal. I know, and I'm deeply sorry. So your family used you and Bruce, just like you used me, I observed, my tone icy. She looked miserable. I tempered my emotions. If you don't want the answer, don't ask the question. Mostly, Daisy admitted sorrowfully. Things went downhill after the lawsuit, and my family wanted nothing to do with me. That explains their treatment of me after you left, I remarked. It also sheds light on why you thought it was acceptable to use me while waiting for Bruce. Everyone seemed to have the upper hand except me. Reinforcing my belief that reconciliation with Daisy was unlikely, given all that had transpired, Daisy seemed to share this sentiment, showing no initiative to revive what we once had. However, as we reconciled, I glimpsed the woman I fell in love with, sparking hope. Surprisingly, my animosity towards her and Bruce lessened after his demise, although I still wished for his just punishment beyond this life. Mr. Smith granted me the day off for Daisy's surgery, arranging for a substitute teacher. At the hospital, I expressed my worries before she was wheeled into the operating room. I've said hurtful things and I'm sorry, I began. I hope you can overcome this. Daisy's weak smile surprised me. Thank you, Mike. I accept your apology. I'm sorry for what I've done to you, she confessed. I love you, and you've endured more than you should have. Promise me something, she implored. What? I inquired. Find someone you love no matter what, she sincerely urged. I agreed, feeling a sense of absolution. We need to proceed to the operating room, sir, the orderly interrupted. For one moment, I requested. Spontaneously, I kissed Daisy's cheek. You've got this, I reassured her. For a brief moment, she resembled the woman I married, prompting me to wonder if she ever truly loved me beyond my role as a provider. I rose, feeling a bit lightheaded as the orderly guided her gurney out of the room. That was kind of you, Mike, Mom murmured softly as we followed into the operating room. After she was wheeled inside, we settled in the waiting area. Hours passed while the surgery progressed. Attempting to focus on the TV proved futile. My thoughts remained fixated on the tumultuous events of the past decade. Mom crocheted quietly while I paced, drowning myself in one cup of machine-made coffee after another, trapped in a relentless cycle of memories. 6 hours later, Dr. Samuels emerged from the operating room with a troubling expression. He motioned for us to join him in a nearby room, where he sat across from us, visibly weary. I braced for bad news, fearing he might break down in tears. Mom's grip on my hand was so tight it made my fingers ache, and I anticipated his words before he uttered them. "I'm deeply sorry, Mrs. Carpenter, Mr. Carpenter. We did everything within our power for Daisy. However, the level of infection and damage to her internal organs was too severe," he conveyed with sorrow. Her body ceased functioning. She had signed a DNR and a form consenting to donate her body to cancer research. Despite our ethical efforts, once her heart stopped, we were unable to revive her. "Please accept my condolences for your loss." Instantly, tears streamed down Mom's face, and though I felt a tear welling up in my eye, I refused to let it fall. I embraced my mother as she wept, nodding in acknowledgement to the doctor. "Thank you for all your efforts," I expressed to him. We exchanged a handshake, and I noticed a tear escaping from his eye. Once Mom had composed herself, we walked back to Daisy's room in a daze. We packed her belongings in silence, knowing words were unnecessary. In the bedside table drawer, I discovered a small envelope labeled Mike in Daisy's handwriting. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. "Mike," the letter commenced, "you will only read this if I do not survive. Thank you for being there for me, especially in these last weeks. You owe me nothing, but you and your mother stood by me when others deserted me. I realize what I did to you a decade ago was inexcusable, and I deeply regret causing you pain. Despite everything, a part of me still loves you, and I'm sorry for the turmoil my involvement with Bruce has caused me. I understand that you will never feel the same toward me, and I respect that. My hope is that my passing will bring you peace at last. With love, Daisy." The note left me trembling, tears streaming down my face as I showed it to my mom. It unleashed a torrent of emotions. We shared, crying and holding each other, the first time I'd wept since my father's passing 6 years ago. Packing Daisy's belongings, I realized a profound change within me. A decade of anger and bitterness evaporated, replaced by an unexpected calmness. Her passing seemed to break down walls of resentment, offering me a way out of the dark maze I'd been trapped in. Strangely, her passing brought healing. After leaving the hospital in a daze, we settled Daisy's things at my mom's house, sharing a sober dinner. Later, she handed me a photo of Daisy smiling in her mother's chair during chemotherapy, a memento to cherish. Asking about contacting Daisy's family, my mom offered to call, but I declined, recalling a previous difficult conversation. Instead, I promised to make the call once home, taking the number she provided. Calling Daisy's father, Fred, I was met with hostility, leaving me puzzled by his animosity, considering their refusal of support and retirement cruise. "I regret to inform you that your daughter Daisy passed away during surgery today," I conveyed. "I don't have a daughter named Daisy," Fred grumbled. "Not anymore," I clarified. "Why are you calling?" Fred inquired. "I just thought you might want to know," I responded. "What do you want from me?" Fred questioned. "Are you expecting us to request her body or something?" I countered, "No, she donated her body to cancer research," I disclosed, barely containing my frustration. "Well, at least her life served a purpose," he growled. "Don't call here again." I heard him curse before terminating the call. Although I felt the urge to call back and vent my anger, I realized it would be futile. With a sigh, I dialed my principal's number and informed him of the news. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mike," he sympathized. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I replied, "but I'll be okay." "Say, why don't you take the remainder of the week off, and I'll mark it as paid parental leave. I'll arrange for a substitute." "Thank you. I really appreciate it," I expressed. After concluding our conversation, I retrieved a beer from the fridge. As I opened the bottle, I gazed at the photo my mom had given me. "Here's to you, kid," I murmured, taking a deep sip. In June, I drove to the cemetery, always feeling uneasy among reminders of mortality. Parking under a large maple tree, I made my way to the monument. Despite its newness, it bore the name Williams, a decision I reluctantly accepted due to bureaucratic insistence. I placed a white carnation in the bronze flower tube beside the monument, reflecting on the decision to bury Daisy's ashes rather than scatter them. Bruce, on the other hand, lay in a neglected corner, marked only by a simple concrete block with a serial number. Afterward, I poured a bottle of urine on his grave, a solitary act of closure. If anyone caught me urinating on his grave, I'd have some explaining to do. After a few minutes of reflection, I bid him farewell. All my tears were shed last week at her burial. Despite reaching out to Daisy's family and friends, I figured if Joe DiMaggio could honor Marilyn for 2 decades, I could lay Daisy to rest and leave her carnations. Sometimes, amidst the grayness, I felt neither sad nor happy, but like an empty blackboard waiting to be filled. Heading back to my car, I noticed 2 other mourners nearby, a woman in a neat black dress, her long blonde hair braided, and a young boy in a camouflage jacket. Approaching them, I glanced at the sign, Ryan G. Anger, Sergeant, USMC. The woman looked at me with fear in her blue eyes. "I'm sorry," I murmured, not wanting to intrude. Before she could respond, the boy said, "I miss him so much," his eyes reflecting the same shade of blue as his mother's, his words laden with longing, perhaps seeking solace or reaching out for help. He must have been a handsome man if he resembled his father. I knelt down, pulling out a notepad and pen from my pocket, tools I used more than my phone's note function. "Here, son," I said, offering them to him. "Write him a note and tuck it in that crack next to the marker. He'll get it." He hugged me, took the notebook and pen, and began writing. As he did, his mother gazed at me with genuine gratitude. Suddenly, I heard 2 soft chuckles, one in each ear, a female and a male. Then the female voice whispered, "Keep your promise." In that moment, I sensed June would no longer be a struggle for me. The police showed up at my door and told me I have a daughter I never knew about who was born 15 years ago. Her mother is serving a life sentence, and now I have no idea what to do. Hey everyone, when I, 32 male, was a teenager, I dated a girl, Kay. One day, Kay broke up with me out of the blue with no explanation. Fast forward 15 years later, the police showed up at my apartment. Long story short, Kay was pregnant with my kid 15 years ago. She got charged with a bunch of drug charges, and when they asked if her daughter could go to any family, she said I was the dad. Well, after a paternity test, I do have a 15-year-old daughter with Kay, so my daughter is going to come live with me today. I'm not a dad, I don't have kids or a significant other, just dogs, so I'm pretty clueless when it comes to being a dad or taking care of a kid, especially one who's a teenager. After talking with her social worker, she said Kay was neglectful to my daughter and isn't going to be used to being taken care of or having structure, which will be a big adjustment for her. The social worker says I need to be patient with her and just show her love and support even if she doesn't want it. I have a room all ready for her in my apartment. It is pretty basic because I didn't want to overwhelm her. So yeah, she's coming today, just hoping for some support, maybe some tips. Update: a few days later I posted on Friday that my daughter was coming to live with me, who I had no idea about until her mother went to jail on a bunch of drug charges. It has been a big adjustment for both my daughter and myself. I told her when I first picked her up that I know this is very new for both of us, so I know it's going to take some time to adjust. She has been through a lot. From what I can tell, she's very underweight and not used to constantly having meals. I put a snack bin in her room, so she hopefully doesn't feel the need to hide food, at least stuff that isn't supposed to be left out. I told her she could get food from the kitchen whenever she wanted, but that seemed to overwhelm her, so it's now a snack bin. I also have breakfast, dinner, and lunch on weekends at a consistent time, so she just knows a meal is going to happen. She also has nightmares and screams. Of course, she hasn't told me what they're about. I don't expect her to yet, but whatever it was traumatic for her, so I'm in the process of finding a therapist for her. For some more positive things, I got her to open up enough to find out some things about her. Firstly, she loves my dogs. We took them on a walk together. She's smart, loves to read, and she likes to play basketball. I, of course, told her some stuff about me. She's pretty quiet and reserved. I expected her to not be really open with me, considering I am a stranger to her, but things so far aren't too bad, going relatively well. Update 2. So probably a lot of you guys have seen the post about me recently, finding out about my 15-year-old daughter and getting custody of her. Well, things have been going pretty good so far. Today, she was sitting in the kitchen doing homework, and once she finished, she started playing with my dogs but left a few papers out after putting the rest away. I asked what those were. She said, "Oh, just some tests I had this week." I asked if I could see them. She said sure. She had gotten A's on 3 tests, chemistry, history, and geometry, after being at school for less than 2 weeks. I was honestly very impressed. Not because I don't think she's smart, but because she just started at a new school and is having a big life adjustment. I told her that was amazing and ended up going on about how at her age I didn't care about the school aspect of school, just cared about sports and my friends. She said, "I enjoy learning and reading, it helps me get away from life." Then it hit me. It was her way of escaping from the, assumingly, not good life with her mom and focusing her mind on something else like learning and reading. It honestly makes me really sad to think about. Update 3, I have been posting on here kind of a lot recently. Basically, I recently not only found out but also got custody of my 15-year-old daughter. Even though I don't know a lot just based on speculation, her mom wasn't a good mother, and the poor girl has been through a lot. Earlier, we were out to eat because I didn't feel like cooking, and I found out my daughter never had tacos. So we went out for tacos, and we were having a very casual conversation until a mother with her 2 young daughters, I would say both girls under 10, came in. You could just tell the girls were having fun with their mom, and all 3 just clearly loved each other. Well, my daughter got quiet and kept staring at them. I didn't want to pry, so I kept quiet. She didn't say anything until, randomly on the drive home, she said, "Sometimes it's hard seeing girls have a good relationship with their mom. I get jealous because my mom and I never did." Then she started crying and let me know she wanted to be left alone the rest of the night. It was hard seeing her cry and upset. It is also difficult to know, even though I'm now around in my daughter's life and I'm trying to be a good parent. She still spent the first 15 years of her life not having a good relationship with her mom, and I can't fix that. I wish I could, but I can't, which sucks because she didn't deserve to be neglected and possibly abused. I'm just in my feelings and really sad for my daughter. Update 4, I have shared here about getting full custody of my daughter, who I did not know about. It has been a little over 2 months. She gives me a hard time, honestly. I haven't yelled at her or anything like that. I understand she's been through it. We're both in therapy to help. Well, this whole week she has been really rude and arguing with me. It has been very rough. During one of the arguments, she ended up telling me some very personal stuff I'm not going to share, but I will say she had a very rough start to life. I was trying my best to comfort her. She seemed like she was having a panic attack. We were just sitting in silence, and she said, "You know, you're pretty good at the whole dad thing for being a newbie." I laughed and said thank you and told her being her dad had been enjoyable. It was silent for a while, but then she said, "Thanks, Dad." That made my whole year, to be honest, been having a bit of happy tears. Update 5, I have shared quite a few posts on here about finding out I had a teen daughter with an ex of mine. My daughter was also neglected and both physically and mentally abused by her mother. After drug charges, she came to live with me. Things have been going well. She even once referred to me as Dad. We still have tough days, but therapy has helped her a lot, and I'm even in therapy now to help with this big life adjustment. A little over a month ago, my daughter started feeling fatigued, was losing weight that sadly took a while for her to gain, and was pale and just seemed unwell. I was worried and started taking her to the doctors. They were convinced it was just a bad cold that was going around, but it lasted way longer than any cold should, so I took her to other doctors. One recently decided to run some tests. I honestly didn't know what would be wrong with her. At certain points, I figured I was a new dad and just over-worrying about my daughter. Today, we found out she has leukemia. This poor girl has had such a tough life already, and now this. I am pissed. I am upset. I am terrified. I've had family members go through chemo, so I know it's no easy task, and it'll mentally be hard on both of us, and extremely physically hard on my poor girl. She hasn't said much since we found out earlier this morning. I would just like you guys to send good vibes, messages, and possibly advice if you have any. Update 6, I have shared a lot here about my daughter. I didn't know about her until the police came to my door wondering if I could take her in. Her mother, my ex, was neglectful, mentally and sometimes physically abusive towards my daughter. I was just working on building a relationship with her, and we were starting to get close. A little over a month ago, she got diagnosed with cancer, leukemia specifically. Life has not been fair at all to this poor girl. She has been doing inpatient chemo for almost a month now. That's been rough. She's either quiet or verbally attacking me and taking her anger out on me. I haven't said much about that. I understand she's angry. I mean, she's only 15, a sophomore in high school, and has been through so much. She's been doing virtual therapy sessions with her therapist and talking to people at the hospital as well. She's coming home in a few days. She will hopefully be able to relax in her bed. She gets to see my dogs, which she loves dearly. It's been mentally draining for both of us, mostly her. I know she lost most of the weight she was able to gain living with me. She was extremely underweight when she came to live with me. Even with anti-nausea meds, she just doesn't have an appetite right now. Chemo has made reading harder, and she refuses to listen to audiobooks, so she's grumpy about not reading since it's something that has always brought her comfort. It's just clear she's upset and frustrated, which is understandable, and that's why I let her kind of get upset with me. But I do let her know that what she says hurts me. But I know she's a teenager who has been hurt her whole life, and now going through something extremely difficult. Update 7. Hi everyone, this is with permission from her. I'm posting a picture of my daughter coming home from a month of inpatient chemo. I'm the one who posts on here a lot about how I got my daughter, who I didn't know about. My last post was about dealing with her new cancer diagnosis. She was super happy to be home, be able to sleep in her own bed and see our dogs. I have been reading to her. We started the Divergent book series, which is actually really good. I've never read them before. Since being home, she has been in a better mood compared to being in the hospital. But chemo cancer has been still so mentally difficult on her. It's also been hard on me, not in the same way, of course, but just because I love her and hate seeing her go through this, especially after everything she's been through. She also tends to take her frustration out on me verbally, which is okay. I know this is hard on her. She's only 15 and has been through a lot. Anyway, just wanted to give a bit of an update on everything. Update 8. Hi everyone, it's been a while. I've shared many posts about my 15-year-old daughter, who I didn't know existed until 8 months ago. It has been challenging, especially with her getting diagnosed with cancer, leukemia. Well, she has been so strong during this fight against leukemia. I am beyond proud of her. She is such a strong young lady who has gone through so much throughout her life. Well, tomorrow starts a whole new chapter for my daughter. She's getting a stem cell transplant. It won't be easy, but if it goes well, this is going to do her so much good. And my daughter will finally be able to live the life she deserves. So today she is getting spoiled by me and my whole family because, for a while, things are going to be really difficult for her. So please send good vibes and thoughts our way. I also want to thank everyone for all the love and support we have gotten on here. There has been no update since, so we must send our best wishes for Ope.
My girlfriend and I crossed paths in a unique and sad way. It happened during Hurricane Katrina when her husband tragically died, and their entire house was swept away by the force of nature. The news was full of sad stories, and I was deeply concerned about their fate, but I had no idea that fate had a surprise in store for me. On a regular Sunday, I found myself in church, unaware of an unexpected encounter awaiting me. Our church had become a refuge for many families affected by the hurricane. The pastor's call for volunteers to provide temporary shelter to these families struck a chord with me. At first, the idea of opening my home to strangers was daunting, but as the pastor spoke, he shed light on a truth I hadn't realized. Many of us, including me, are often away from home due to work, leaving our homes empty most of the time. The pastor's words resonated with me because my new job as a doctor's assistant required long hours and frequent absence from home. Considering my situation, I realized that I recently bought a spacious house with 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. Given my busy work schedule, it made sense to offer temporary housing to those in need. In my mind, they would use a guest room as a safe haven on their journey to stability. The empty space in my house seemed like an opportunity I had overlooked as I focused on my job. Additionally, I believed that doing a good deed might lead to positive outcomes in my own life. At 29, I was a single man facing dating challenges. Despite my efforts, the women I liked didn't reciprocate, and those I got along with turned out to be incompatible. Recognizing this, I decided to live alone and wait for the right person. With renewed determination, I volunteered to offer shelter to a family in need. When I offered to help, my pastor introduced me to a 28-year-old widow, radiating beauty, who had lost her husband in Hurricane Katrina. She had 2 young daughters, aged 5 and 7, and their story deeply moved me. When I met her, my heart was touched, and we immediately connected. Her sincerity, kindness, and compatibility confirmed I had made the right decision. She and her children settled into my house quickly, and I ensured their comfort by buying new furniture, electronics, and groceries. In the first few days, work kept me busy, and I almost forgot about the people in my house. But the following morning, I returned from a business trip to a pleasant surprise. There was a soft knock on my bedroom door, and the smell of a freshly cooked breakfast filled the air. Opening the door, I was greeted by her smiling face as she brought a tray of scrambled eggs, sizzling bacon, and a cup of hot coffee to the table. All irritation disappeared as I embraced the gesture with gratitude. Breakfast in bed, a cherished childhood memory, became a regular occurrence. She treated me with great care, even tying my shoelaces before I left for work. Her children were well-mannered and addressed me with respect, calling me Dad. I became attached to them and hoped to adopt them someday. They not only took care of me, but also cleaned the house and cooked meals with the money I provided. She eventually got a job, showing her determination to be independent. Over time, she transformed from a guest into a family member in my house. We developed a strong bond, and I found myself deeply attached to her and her children. While I knew she wouldn't live with me permanently due to her job, I wished she could stay longer. The days passed quickly, and her presence became an integral part of my life. Our house radiated warmth and satisfaction when she and her children were around. Deep down, I understood that she would eventually gain independence and establish her own home. I wished her success and happiness, but the thought of her leaving stirred conflicting emotions in me. As our bond deepened, the chemistry and connection between us became evident. We found excuses to touch each other around the house, creating a strong attraction. Even simple moments, like when she cooked in the kitchen and I stood behind her, sparked desire. One evening, as we watched a late-night show and laughed together, she leaned over and rested her head on my shoulder, deepening our connection. Emotions took over, and we shared a passionate kiss, igniting further closeness on the couch. Since that night, she became more than a woman seeking refuge in my house. Our physical closeness grew, and I cherished every moment together. However, she still lived in the guest room, and the direction of our relationship remained uncertain. She had her doubts, and I respected her boundaries. In just 3 months, she landed a job as a cashier at the nearby grocery store, which marked a crucial step toward her independence. While I willingly shouldered the financial responsibilities, covering all the expenses, she used her earnings to support her children's kindergarten and buy clothes. It felt like a partnership built on love and mutual understanding, and I was prepared to keep helping her as much as I could. I stood by her side, offering unwavering support as she worked to rebuild her life. As Christmas approached, I invited her and her kids to celebrate the holiday with my family, introducing her as my girlfriend. I was relieved when my mother warmly welcomed them. She cared deeply for her and her children. However, in private, my mother shared her concerns with me. She reminded me of her children from a previous marriage and suggested I consider finding a partner without such responsibilities. Her words made me contemplate the nature of our relationship. The challenges ahead were undeniable. This relationship was unlike any I'd encountered before. It involved not only our connection, but also the integration of her children into my life. Despite my mother's warnings, I couldn't ignore the deep bond between us and the love I had for her and her children. After a heart-to-heart conversation with my mother about my girlfriend and her children, I realized her worries stemmed from love. She only wanted what's best for me. I reassured my mother, acknowledging her care and guidance, but I couldn't disregard the profound love I found in this incredible woman and her children. I reminded her that she longed for me to be in a relationship, and now she appeared concerned about the added responsibilities. In my eyes, my girlfriend was everything I ever dreamed of. She remained the same loving and compassionate person I met 4 months ago, without any major issue. She exemplified the qualities of a responsible and caring mother for her children, and I couldn't ask for more. Her inner and outer beauty continued to captivate me, and my love for her deepened every day. Her presence filled my life with positivity and rejuvenation, especially after returning from work trips. Being with her and her children brought me joy and happiness that felt surreal. Our connection was genuinely extraordinary, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. Despite the strong daily bond we shared, she consistently chose to sleep in the guest room. On one of these evenings, I mustered the courage to ask why she preferred not to spend the night in my bed. Her unexpected response made me feel guilty for bringing up such a sensitive topic. She delicately explained that she hadn't spent a night in someone else's bed since her late husband passed away. Her words carried both tenderness and pain, making me regret broaching the subject. I hugged her tightly at that moment, understanding the depth of her emotions. I realized she needed time and understanding to heal from the pain of her past. Recognizing this, I gladly gave her the space she needed. However, one evening, upon returning home from work, a strange suspicion crept in again. I noticed that my beloved cashew nuts and malt from the refrigerator had been eaten. This puzzled me, because my girlfriend and her children had no interest in these snacks. In fact, my girlfriend disliked them due to their high-calorie content. Since I knew she wasn't a fan of cashews and malt, it seemed unlikely that she was responsible for their disappearance. Rather than confront her about it, I decided not to make a big deal out of it. Yet, curiosity got the better of me, and I jokingly asked her 7-year-old daughter, with whom I often exchanged playful banter. To my surprise, she mentioned a name I had never heard before and accused this mysterious man of being the snack thief. At first, I thought it was just another playful exchange, but her serious tone and detailed account caught me off guard. It was evident she wasn't joking. According to her, a specific person came to our house when I was away for work, even staying overnight with her mother. She expressed strong disapproval of this man, leaving me in shock. The underlying message in her words was incredible, because the thought of my girlfriend being unfaithful had never crossed my mind. I trusted her completely and couldn't fathom her being unfaithful. A whirlwind of emotions, from disbelief to anger and eventually a headache, overwhelmed me. As the truth unfolded, the weight of her daughter's words instilled undeniable certainty and drove me to search for concrete evidence. Driven by the need to uncover the reality of what transpired during my 3-day absence from work, I resorted to installing hidden cameras on the porch and in the living room, discreetly recording. I anxiously awaited my return, mentally preparing for the painful truth that awaited me. As I delved into the footage, the shocking truth lay bare before me. I witnessed a man coming to my house during my absence, brazenly spending the night with my girlfriend. To make matters worse, he shamelessly indulged in my beloved nuts and malt, and even had the audacity to claim my chair. The sight of this uninvited guest assuming my role in the sanctity of my own home filled me with anger and a sense of betrayal. It was a painful truth to accept, realizing that my girlfriend had deceived me in such a profound way. Following this heart-wrenching revelation, my heart shattered into pieces, and I felt like a complete fool for having placed such unwavering trust in her. The pain and devastation were too intense to immediately confront her. I needed time to process the betrayal and come to terms with the harsh reality that now loomed over our once loving relationship. I tried to understand why she had chosen to hurt me so deeply, considering that I had invested all my emotional and physical strength into our relationship. In the days that followed, my emotions were constantly in turmoil as I embarked on a journey of deep self-reflection. It was challenging for me to comprehend the person she had become and the reasons behind her betrayal. The strong love that once bound us was now broken. My mind kept replaying our shared moments, desperately seeking any hints of her betrayal, but this only intensified my confusion and deepened the wounds of betrayal. Filled with disappointment and distrust towards women, I began mentally distancing myself from relationships. When I finally gathered the courage to confront her about the hidden camera recording, emotions overwhelmed me, creating a tense atmosphere. I called her into my room and suggested we watch the video. As we watched, tears streamed down her face, and she pleaded with me, admitting that this was not the way she wanted me to discover the truth. Overwhelmed with emotions, I insisted on knowing the identity of the man caught on the video. She explained that he was her ex-boyfriend from New Orleans, who had sought refuge in a shelter after surviving a devastating flood. I was taken aback when she disclosed that he would visit our house in my absence. My confusion deepened because I had believed her before. When she claimed she had never cheated, it became painfully clear that her words about loyalty to her late husband were fiction, as spending a night with another man shattered this illusion. This revelation cast doubt on other truths I held dear. As she continued revealing her secrets, it became apparent that she had become pregnant at a young age, but the father of her children abandoned her. When she explained why she lied about her husband's passing away, I was shocked to my core. She admitted she wanted to see how people treated the bereaved and craved the sympathy and support a widow received. At that moment, I was hit with a wave of bewilderment, realizing that the woman I had welcomed into my life and home was a stranger. The weight of betrayal crushed me, eroding trust and security in our relationship. Overcome by fear and uncertainty, I found the courage to make the painful decision to ask her to leave my house that evening. In the web of deceit she had spun, I could find no solace or peace because I could no longer hide the person responsible for such a web of lies. While the severity of her deception warranted immediate expulsion, a sense of responsibility for her 2 daughters tugged at my heart. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving innocent children without a roof over their heads, especially considering they had been ensnared in their mother's lies. Empathy compelled me to protect and care for them. It was with a heavy heart that I informed her she had to leave my house the next day. But I couldn't simply abandon the children to their fate. Instead, I made it my mission to secure their well-being. I made the firm decision to rent an apartment for an extended stay, providing them with temporary shelter and stability. My intent was driven solely by compassion for her daughters, devoid of any remnants of affection for her. If it had been just her, I wouldn't have hesitated to send her away the same evening. Watching them leave was emotionally challenging, as I knew the sacrifices I had made to ensure a safe place for them. It served as a stark reminder of the depth of deception and its impact on innocent lives. I felt a heavy heart when I realized I had become emotionally attached to her daughters, viewing them as my own. They had become undeserving participants in this situation, and I couldn't accept that they would suffer the consequences of their mother's deceit. It was not an easy decision, but I believed it was the right one. Reflecting on the situation, I couldn't help but wonder if her affection for me had been genuine or just another facet of her lies. The uncertainty weighed on me, but I took solace in the fact that I had uncovered the truth, however little comfort it offered me at the time. The thought of starting a family with someone who had deceived me sent shivers down my spine. I was immensely grateful that the truth had come to light, saving me from potential consequences in the future. I made a resolute decision to exercise caution in relationships, giving priority to honesty and transparency. This experience left me with a whirlwind of emotions, but also provided a valuable lesson on safeguarding my heart and making informed choices. I also asked for permission to see her daughters and spend time with them in parks. To my surprise, she agreed. As time passed, I continued to work diligently and tried to spend quality time with the girls, picking them up once a week and enjoying our moments together. One day, while dining at a cafe, her older daughter mentioned that her mother had been looking unwell and acting strangely. At first, I didn't think much of her words, but when she revealed that her mom was probably sick because she gave herself a daily injection in her leg, I was taken aback. It hit me, and I understood what this meant. I reassured the girl, telling her that her mom would get better soon. I didn't know how to protect the girls from their mother, who was using illegal substances, and I consulted with my mother. She advised me to report the situation to the Child Protection Services, which I did. However, I didn't want the children to be left without warmth and love in a shelter. So I informed the Child Protection Services that I intended to adopt the girls, hoping for my mother's support. 6 months have passed since that day when my ex-girlfriend lost her parental rights. The girls spent about 2 months in a shelter, which deeply saddened me. But I managed to adopt the girls, and I felt joy. My mother supported my decision and provided all possible help in raising my newfound daughters.
I'm currently feeling really lost in my situation and need some guidance. My wife and I have been married for 17 years. We're both in our late 30s and early 40s, and we've known each other for about 23 years since high school. Here's what I know. 3 days ago, my wife came home from work, but she had to work on the 4th day. She seemed very upset and quickly packed an overnight bag before leaving. Our oldest daughter witnessed this. I tried talking to my wife, but she was too upset to speak and was in tears. She seemed almost panicked. She hasn't responded to any of our calls or texts. I contacted her parents and they eventually told me she's safe with them and asked for patience and understanding. That's all I know. I also tried reaching out to her sister, brother, and a close work friend. Her brother had no information, and her work friend said she was at work in the morning but disappeared by lunch 3 days ago. It's been 3 days now with no contact from my wife, not even with the kids. Nobody is telling us anything, and I'm here with our 3 daughters, trying to manage without her. The kids keep asking what's going on with Mom, but all I can say is that she's at her parents' house, and we need to be patient and understanding. I have a strong urge to pack up the kids and drive to her parents' house without warning. It's only a 3-hour drive, and waiting here in uncertainty is agonizing. The kids think we had a big fight and are getting a divorce, but that's far from the truth. We never fight, and the kids know that. I don't know what's happening, and my emotions are all over the place as I try to handle everything without her. If something tragic happened, wouldn't her family be the first to tell me? Maybe some past trauma resurfaced, but if it were me, I turn to my wife for support. We're in the dark and nothing makes sense. I'm at a loss for what to do, just sitting here with the girls, feeling worried, scared, angry, and every other emotion in this situation. Can anyone offer a logical perspective and clarity on this? I'm stuck in a cycle of confusion due to my emotional state. Update. It turns out my wife had an affair. It was a long night, and I didn't sleep much. I don't expect to spend much time on the computer today, but I did read all the posts yesterday and into the night, and I'll eventually read the responses today. Here's what I know. My father-in-law didn't call me last night, so I eventually contacted the police as many of you suggested. It turns out my wife had been having an affair for at least 2 years. Probably longer. The other man had a heart attack on Tuesday and passed away that night. My mother-in-law, and likely my sister-in-law, knew about it and were covering for her. Still, no contact from my wife, neither to me nor the girls. I'm trying to keep this information from them for now. I honestly don't know what to do from here. That's all I know, and it's almost unbearable. Please keep us in your thoughts and prayers. Responding to a commenter, my oldest daughter knows about the affair. She's very sharp, and we had a long talk last night. My mom knows and plans to stay with us this week. I took time off work, and my boss, who's also a close friend, knows about the situation, which is a relief. Any support I can get right now is valuable. Responding again, yes, your assumptions are correct. My wife had an affair with an older divorced man, and the situation escalated quickly because of his wake funeral. The wake occurred the same night I called the police, so you can imagine how complicated it became. Many details are still unfolding, and I appreciate the support from everyone. I might share more about this eventually. It feels like I could write a book at this point. We've been in touch with everyone, but it's still a challenging situation. I don't drink and am trying to eat, although sleep is elusive. My priority is making sure my girls are okay. Reddit helps me relax in these difficult times. Providing more information, it's been just over a week since my D-Day, Discovery Day. Since then, I've learned that my wife's affair had been going on for over 4 years, though I still don't have the exact timeline. It likely started emotionally and then became physical. I'm curious about how the pandemic and lockdowns played a role in this situation, but I may not get all the answers. Yesterday, my in-laws unexpectedly visited their grandkids. My wife has been staying at their house since this ordeal began, which is frustrating. They only spent about 15 minutes with the girls before asking to speak with me privately. The conversation was long and complicated, but in summary, my wife wants to come home but is afraid of facing the consequences of her actions. Her parents tried to convince me to forgive her and rebuild the marriage, but I lied and said I wasn't sure about my future plans, as I intend to get a divorce. But I worry that if I disclose this, my wife won't be honest with me, and I might never learn the truth. However, I do want her to sit down with me and explain everything if that's possible. We've been together for over 17 years, including our time since high school, with 3 kids, countless memories, and shared experiences. I want her to look me in the eyes and tell me the whole story. I also want my children to see that I gave her a chance to explain herself and apologize, trying to handle things like mature adults. I'm striving to choose a path that sets the best example for my kids. I'm unsure if I'm doing it right, though. Legally, I can't prevent my wife from coming back to our home, as the lawyer has clarified. Even though I don't want it right now, if she decides to return, I can't stop her. My daughters and I have established a nice routine, so I made a demand I thought would be difficult to meet. I told her she could come home when she sat down with me in person, looked me in the eyes, and openly discussed her affair from start to finish, answering all my questions honestly. She also needed to apologize to the girls in person and address their questions. I thought it was fair, considering they already know. Legally, she can return home without meeting these demands, but if she's afraid to face us, maybe we can use that to our advantage. Is this approach wrong? I'm not trying to be sneaky or dishonest. I just don't want to start living together yet if I can delay it, especially with a mandatory 90-day waiting period for divorce in our state. Her return is inevitable and we'll both need to resume work eventually, regardless of this situation. I prefer to prolong it so I can plan and improve my mental and emotional well-being. My wife has been texting our daughters, claiming she doesn't want a divorce and repeatedly apologizing to them. They've shared the texts with me and ask about me daily. It seems that the reality of her actions is hitting her hard, especially in the last few days. How should I handle this? Was my demand unreasonable? It sounds like my wife may come home sooner than I expected. Right now, I feel confident in my current path. I'm not shaken by this because I anticipated it happening eventually. My priority is making the best decision for my daughters and myself as we move forward. I want to thank everyone who has offered encouragement, advice, and support. In response to a question about reconciliation, I appreciate your outreach. During the first day or two after discovering the affair, I was unsure about getting a divorce, but my emotions clouded my judgment. As I began to recall the lies about her girls' weekend trips, late nights due to traffic, and work-related travel, I realized the extent of her deception. Every day, I uncover new lies that were meant to deceive me and our daughters, so she could be with this other man. I apologize for the length of this response, but I needed to express these thoughts. The weekend was terrible, but my wife returned home yesterday, following a build-up throughout the week. In the past, I would have greeted her with a hug and a kiss when she entered, but this time there was an incredibly uncomfortable silence between us. She tried to hug me, but I turned away as if nothing had happened. After she settled in, I naturally asked her to tell me everything, and she again said she wasn't ready. We had the same result when we spoke on the phone earlier in the week. I insisted that her only condition for returning home was to explain her nearly 3-week absence to the family because of her love for us. However, she kept repeating that she wasn't ready for that. It was challenging not to lose my temper, but I took deep breaths to regain my composure. Unfortunately, I failed, and in frustration, I blurted out that she had been having a 4-year affair with a coworker, planned to leave me for him, and had cut ties with her entire family. And now, she walked in without fulfilling the one condition I had asked for, and told her I wanted a divorce. This is when things took a bizarre turn. Her body language and facial expression showed that she had no idea how much I knew about her affair. She looked at me with wide eyes and then stood in the kitchen, staring at the floor, saying nothing. She remained stoic, and I didn't expect this reaction. I thought she might react emotionally, confess tearfully, blame the affair on me, or suggest a serious conversation to work things out. But her response was silence. We stood in the kitchen in absolute silence for what felt like 5 minutes, and it was the strangest moment I've ever experienced. She seemed at a loss for words, and so was I. I had prepared myself for all possible scenarios for this confrontation, except for this one. So, I decided to outline everything I knew about her affair, even adding some of my assumptions about how she met her affair partner, her sister's involvement, and what happened during COVID. She continued to stare at the floor throughout my explanation. I grew angrier as I spoke because she remained silent. I did my best not to raise my voice or become obscene. Eventually, I composed myself, and there was another prolonged, awkward silence. My anger turned into sadness as I realized the gravity of the situation. I softly asked her what I had done to drive her away, if she had ever loved me, and if the affair was worth it. Still, she didn't respond, showing no tears, no apology, no shouting, and no explanation. She just stood there with her head down. This silence hurt even more than D-Day did. I kept staring at her, unsure of what to do. And then it got worse. Our daughters had overheard the entire encounter, and I feel incredibly foolish. I'd been so focused on putting their needs first over the past few weeks that I didn't consider their whereabouts when confronting my wife. Our oldest daughter stormed downstairs and expressed a lot of pent-up anger. My wife quickly ran upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom. That's where we are now. I heard my wife crying for most of the night until I fell asleep. Only our youngest daughter has attempted to talk to her, while the rest of us have avoided her. If I can muster the courage, I plan to suggest that my wife stays with her sister until we finalize the divorce. However, this is still her home, and it would be miserable for all of us to cohabit with her. I was wrong about my wife, and all of you were right. I was wrong about our years together, the memories, and the significant moments in our life. I was convinced she would beg for forgiveness and confess to everything to absolve her guilt. This is the same woman who once drove back to a farmer's market to return $10 in change she had been given by mistake. But it seems we're not worth that effort to her. Maybe we never were. Now what? Today at home was incredibly uncomfortable. My daughters and I tried to continue as we have for the past 2 weeks, but it's not the same. I just want to fast forward through all of this, past the divorce, the awkward conversations, the inevitable arguments and fights, and the drama. For those who had to live with their unfaithful spouse, how did you manage? Especially with kids. I know this is just the beginning, and I keep reading posts that promise it gets better, but I feel so far from that point. I constantly feel like screaming or crying. I'm trying my best to stay emotionally stable for my daughters, but I don't know if I can keep it up for 3 months. School will start soon, and this is my life now. Thank you all for your support and advice. I've been in a tough situation ever since my unfaithful wife returned home after I discovered her affair. I've been trying to put on a facade for my daughters, saying and thinking the right things. However, tonight I have to be honest about my feelings. As many of you mentioned daily, the emotions come in waves, and tonight I was hit hard, causing me to lose my composure a bit. I've already filed for divorce, but my wife, who had the affair, hasn't hired a lawyer yet. I'm trying to be patient and handle this delicately, as I see the possibility of an uncontested divorce where we handle most things ourselves. But after tonight, I'm not sure anymore. During the week, we've been living together, but on Friday nights, my wife goes to her sister's house and returns on Sunday nights. This routine has involved mostly avoiding each other, with occasional interactions between myself and the girls. Unfortunately, my oldest daughter and my wife have had some heated arguments, so they're not speaking to each other. Lately, I've been following the advice I've received here and elsewhere. I've been working hard on controlling my emotions around my wife, even though it's challenging. I've kept my interactions with her brief and indifferent, though always polite and respectful. However, tonight was different. For the past couple of Fridays, my wife would come home from work, prepare for her weekend at her sister's, and leave before I got home from work. But not tonight. She was waiting for me in the kitchen when I arrived. I tried to walk past her, but she grabbed my hand lightly and questioned my treatment of her, just because she's not ready to discuss her affair. This was the first time she even mentioned her cheating since everything came to light nearly a month ago. I tried to hold back, I promise I did. I attempted to keep my cool and walk away, but our daughters were not home at the time, and anger overwhelmed me. So I let out all my frustrations, pains, hurts, and rage. I told her everything, and I can't even estimate how long I went on. At times, my voice grew loud, and I got animated. I poured out all my emotions and the torment I've been experiencing. I could have written a 4,000-word post with all the things I said. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I cried and got emotional, and I was so angry with myself afterward. I had been doing well, and I let her get to me. I knew it would happen, and it did. I'm disappointed in myself. I've been holding in my feelings for a while, and the weight room can only do so much. For the first time, my wife also broke down and got emotional, sobbing uncontrollably. Surprisingly, I found some satisfaction in seeing her hurt like I have been. She mumbled apologies repeatedly during my outburst, and she couldn't say anything else as I left the kitchen, asking her to leave me alone. The girls came home about half an hour later and sensed that something had happened, but I wasn't ready to discuss it. And I don't think they need to know. The younger ones have been doing better, and I don't want to hinder their progress. Telling my oldest would only add to her anger, which I want to avoid. I hate this situation so much. I should have kept my composure. I should have ignored my wife and walked past her. Looking back, it seems like she wanted to start a conversation about her affair, but didn't know how. And it didn't go far because of my explosion. I've actually started worrying about her. I know some of you will criticize me for this, but I don't want any harm to come to her. She's been isolated and alone with her thoughts, with nearly everyone turning their back on her. You can say she deserves it, and that's true, but she's still a human being and the mother of my children. This is a setback for me, and I'm really disappointed in myself. I apologize for the long rant. I called my brother and vented to him too. I'll try to start over on Monday. I'm only human. Venting on her felt good, but now I'm feeling regret. Should I text my wife or should I just leave it be? My wife hasn't left me alone all week. She's been overly nice, continuously apologizing for her affair, crying and trying to engage me, even knocking on my door at night to talk. I've ignored her at times but spoken when I felt like it. However, I finally snapped at her on Wednesday night, telling her to leave me alone. Then something happened last night. Just over a month since my soon-to-be ex-wife returned home after her affair was revealed, things have gotten more uncomfortable as we cohabit. She came into my room last night after our daughters had gone to bed, asking to talk privately, which was different from how she'd been approaching me all week. I resisted at first, but eventually, We went to the garage and sat in my car to avoid arguing in front of the kids. I apologize for the length of this, but she told me everything. According to her, we talked for almost 3 hours. I'm not sure how much I should share. I stayed up all night listening to her cry for hours. I couldn't sleep, and I went through a cycle of crying, anger, resisting the urge to confront her, and repeating. Forgive me if I take a day or so to respond to anyone, but I needed to get this off my chest and try to get some sleep. Having my wife constantly apologize and beg for another chance all evening hasn't helped. Tonight, I had to leave for a few hours just to get away from her because being around her is incredibly painful. On a different note, she was introduced to her affair partner by her sister about 5 years ago, with no romantic intentions initially. He was a higher up at a company she wanted to work for and currently works at, which is how he helped her get the job. Her desire to change jobs was unrelated to her affair, but once she did, she had extra motivation. After she got the job, her affair partner began flirting with her. It started with texting, then progressed to exchanging pictures and more texting, and eventually became physical just before COVID hit. She confessed to her sister and initially wanted to come clean to me but decided to bury it and keep quiet. She claimed to have gone no contact with her affair partner soon after, but as lockdowns and restrictions eased, he reached out to her, and she resumed talking to him. When businesses reopened, the physical side of the affair also resumed. She admitted to ending the affair a couple of times out of guilt, but kept going back to him, so it never really ended. She had detailed notes about her affair timeline, which she read to me, answering questions along the way. She lied about weekend trips with the girls, work-related travel, traffic jams, issues with her parents, shopping trips, and more. There were so many lies that I believed every word, never questioning anything. These lies were a cover for her affair? Hearing all of this made me feel even worse, as many of you had predicted. However, her affection for me didn't decrease during the affair. She didn't become distant, as is often the case. Intimacy did change, but not enough to raise red flags. She confessed to falling in love with her affair partner and wanting a life with him. He was older, divorced, single, and promised her expensive gifts, vacations, and other luxuries. She started daydreaming about escaping her family responsibilities, and the thrill of being with him was too tempting to resist. She spoke candidly, with a lot of emotion, and appeared honest. Midway through her confession, I lost my composure and started crying. It was painful to hear everything, as expected. When she finished, she told me how much she loved me, always had, and was willing to do anything to save our marriage. Many of you had predicted this, but it felt disingenuous to me, as if rehearsed. I've been with her for over half my life, and I can tell when she's not being genuine. Maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't matter. I managed to compose myself better than last week, though I still got angry and said some unkind things, including pointing out that her affair partner was seeing multiple women, and she was just one of many to him. This seemed to upset her greatly. I had thought of a million things to say when she finally confessed, all the one-liners and responses I might throw at her. But in that emotional moment, I couldn't think of most of them. However, I knew I would ask one thing. If she had to choose between her affair partner and me, who would she pick? She hesitated and then mumbled, "That's not fair." I pressed her, and eventually she said she would choose me, of course. I told her that her hesitation was the reason I was divorcing her, as it showed she was lying again. She started sobbing, and that was the last thing she said. We sat in the car for a while with her continuing to cry, but I was tired. I eventually told her that we're divorcing and that, for the sake of our daughters, we owe it to them to co-parent civilly and be present in their lives. I also added that, given all the pain she put me through, I hoped she could handle the divorce amicably, which would demonstrate her love for me. The last thing I said, borrowed from something online, was that I kissed her on the forehead and told her I would have loved her forever. Then, I got out of the car and went to bed. That's where things stand for now. Her chance to contest the divorce has passed, but I haven't spoken to my lawyer yet. I find myself crying again and cycling through depression and anger phases. Hearing everything last night was incredibly difficult, and I could have done without it. Now that I know she could have lied or made it all up, who knows? But it aligned with everything I had pieced together in the past month. So, that's the current situation. This feels never-ending. I have a few good days, start feeling strong, and then something else happens. It feels like it's been months, yet only days at the same time. I'm going to try to sleep. Imagine the love of your life, the only person you've ever loved or kissed, telling you she cheated for over 4 years simply because she was bored. There were no issues in our relationship. She was just bored. I don't know if that makes it worse or better. Thanks for reading and for your support along the way. It's been a rough couple of nights. Very tough. I promise to make an effort to respond tomorrow after I get some sleep.
As a skilled mechanic and committed Marine, John stood out for volunteering to serve in Indochina. In March 1967, he discussed his plans with his wife, Sandra. Married for 3 years, they had a small house and were planning to start a family. Sandra worked as a paralegal, and with her income and his, they managed well financially, with good savings for emergencies. Sandra cried but understood John's strong sense of duty. John was strong and muscular, known as a tough fighter. Marrying his high school sweetheart had calmed him down, though he could still fight if necessary. They said their goodbyes and spent a passionate night together before he left. "You'd better come back in one piece," she said. "And don't go after other women. This is mine, only mine," she added, grabbing his crotch. "Don't worry, sweetie," he said. "I'll take good care of myself. And you'd better behave while I'm away. I know how those wealthy lawyers are." "No problem, sweetie," she replied. "I promise to be good." Before leaving, John updated his will and set up automatic payments from his military salary to cover the mortgage and utilities. He treated himself to a tattoo reading, Death Before Dishonor. In Vietnam, John was a fire team leader. Initially met with skepticism as a reservist, he earned respect after several combat engagements. Unlike many Marines, he avoided local women, staying faithful to his wife Sandra, despite teasing from Lance Corporal Harker. Harker warned him about Jody, slang for men who had military wives whose husbands were deployed, but John trusted Sandra completely. John wrote to Sandra as often as possible and cherished her letters. Initially, he received letters every 2 weeks, but after a few months, they became less frequent. He found it odd, especially as he started receiving more letters from his parents, and even photos of Sandra in a swimsuit he hadn't seen before, wondering who had taken them. That Christmas, he received a card and letter from his parents, but nothing from Sandra. Concerned, but undistracted, he stayed vigilant in Vietnam. In mid-January 1968, stationed near Da Nang, rumors spread of an impending major attack by the enemy, Charlie, around the Tet Lunar New Year. At the end of the month, chaos erupted. John's position was heavily attacked, and they fought fiercely. Most of John's team, including Harker, passed. John was injured. John and other Marines were evacuated to Da Nang, then to a military hospital in San Francisco. Doctors saved his leg, though he faced a long recovery. The bullet missed major organs, and stitches fixed his cheek. His ear was bandaged, and nurses said the scar gave him a distinguished look, though he wasn't so sure. John's time in Vietnam was over. A Marine officer awarded him a Purple Heart and informed him he was being recommended for a Silver Star. John already had a Bronze Star with a Combat V and a Navy Commendation Medal. John's parents met him in San Francisco. He wondered where Sandra was and if she knew he was back in the States. His father, a veteran, chuckled. "Damn, son, I thought I taught you how to duck." His mother hugged him tightly and cried. "Where's Sandra?" John asked. His parents exchanged glances before responding. "I honestly don't know, John," his father finally said. "We tried calling the house and her office, but they kept saying she was out, and she never called back. I haven't seen her in weeks. I went by every weekend to maintain the yard and check on her, but nothing." "Tell him, Bob," John's mother said. "Tell me what, Mom?" John asked. "What's going on?" "John, the last time I saw Sandra was maybe 2.5 months ago. I was coming up the street to your house and saw a guy leaving. He got into a sports car, I think it was a Corvette, and drove off quickly. I saw Sandra at the door in a bathrobe waving goodbye to him," he said. "She didn't say anything when I arrived. I haven't seen her since then. I've been picking up the papers and collecting your mail when I go by. I'm sorry, son." John was heartbroken. He had believed she would stay loyal to him. Then he remembered what Harker said about Jody. Maybe he was right. Now he understood why he hadn't heard from her. "Was it a blue Corvette?" John asked. Bob nodded. "Yes, it was," he said. "Why? Do you know who owns it?" "Yeah," John replied. "It belongs to Eric Swagman, a junior partner at her firm. So she isn't even home long enough to pick up the mail?" "It doesn't seem like it," Bob said. "I hope you don't mind, but I saw a couple of utility and phone bills marked final notice, so I took care of them. I figured you wouldn't want to come home to a house without power or phone service." Thanks, Dad, John said. I'll pay you back when I get home, I promise. Don't worry about it, son, Bob said. Just focus on getting better. Don't stress about this until you're ready. If you want, I can look into getting a power of attorney. If she's not handling the bills, who knows what else she might have done? For all we know, she might have already cleaned you out. John asked a nurse for help in finding a military lawyer. Soon, a Navy lieutenant commander arrived and took notes as John and his parents explained the situation. He took out some papers from his briefcase. I'll get these papers prepared for you, Corporal, he said. They will give your parents special powers of attorney to handle the issues you mentioned. I suggest you see a family law attorney in your home state as soon as possible. I'll have the paperwork ready, and we can meet here this afternoon to sign and notarize it. Thank you, sir, John said. After the lawyer left, Bob turned to his son. As soon as we get home, John, I'll check the bank to see what's going on. I still have the house key you gave me, so I'll stop by and check on things there. You know, George Williams, who retired from the police force a couple of months ago, is now working as a private investigator. I can ask him to look into this if you want, Bob offered. I'm not sure I can afford a private investigator, Dad, John said. Bob shook his head. Don't worry about it, son, he said. George owes me a few favors. We worked together for 13 years on the force. Also, I'll talk to our family lawyer. I think he still handles family law cases. By the way, Bob continued, Mr. Wilkins said, your job at the shop is still available. He's been saving a quarter of your pay since you left as a return bonus. He said he wasn't going to let the best mechanic in the state slip away. But don't tell him I told you. John was grateful. Wilkins was a generous man, but didn't often show it. He was fair and honest with customers, but had a tough exterior that could be off-putting. That sounds good, Dad, John said, a tear rolling down his cheek. Damn that woman, he thought. His parents gave him a comforting hug. It'll be all right, son, his mother said. We'll get through this. A few hours later, the attorney returned with a notary. After signing the papers, John's parents left, promising to call with any news. They thanked the nurse, who assured them John was well cared for and would need extensive physical therapy arranged through the VA. John was finally alone to confront his life's mess. He rested but dreamt about his fallen Marines, not Sandra. A few days later, John got a call from his father. Bad news, John, Bob said. Sandra drained almost all of your checking and savings accounts. About 2 months ago, she took out $8,545 from your savings. I have the bank statement. She took the money out in cash. The only deposits in those 2 months were from your military pay. According to the bank and the teller, Sandra comes in a few days after each payday and withdraws everything except $5, just enough to keep the account active. She didn't open a new account, so I have no idea what she did with the money. All right, Dad, John said. Since you have power of attorney, take her name off the account. We don't have any credit cards, so that's not an issue. Will do, Bob said. I also went by the house. It's a mess. There's moldy food on the table, dishes piled up in the sink, and it smells terrible. It looks like she took all her clothes and personal stuff but left her wedding dress and album behind. I found her wedding and engagement rings in the bathroom trash. I'm sorry. At least the house is still standing, John said. Yeah, Bob replied. Your mother is there now, cleaning up and airing out the place. The bed is a mess. The sheets are badly stained. If I had to guess, Sandra probably had someone else in there. What do you want to do about it? Get rid of it, John said. Dispose of it and pile it up outside if you need to. I'll manage with a cot if I have to. All right, Bob said. I'll handle it. George offered to take your case for free. He said nothing is worse than someone who steals a soldier's wife while he's serving his country. I also found a top-notch lawyer who's agreed to handle your divorce for free. He can't stand Swagman, who apparently has a reputation for going after married women. George suggested we change all the locks on your house, and I agree. Are you okay with that? He asked. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Dad, John said. All right, we'll keep in touch. How are you holding up? Bob asked. I'm doing all right, Dad, really, John said. Who are you trying to convince, me or yourself? Bob asked. John smiled. His father always had a sharp insight. Dad, you've lost men in combat, right? John asked. He knew this was a silly question, given his father's service as a second lieutenant with the 1st Marine Regiment under Colonel Lewis B. Chesty Puller at the Chosin Reservoir in 1950. His father knew all about combat, sacrifice, and death. Yes, son, I have, Bob said. This might sound odd, Dad, but have you ever had dreams where they spoke to you? John asked. Oh, yes. At first, it was almost every night, but it became less frequent over time, Bob said. Have you ever gotten over it? John asked. You never completely get over it, John. It becomes a part of you. You have to make peace with it and learn to live with it, or it will consume you, Bob said. The next 2 weeks flew by for John. He heard from his parents daily with updates on Sandra, but never from her. She had moved in with Eric Swagman and was pregnant by him. Everyone at the office knew about their relationship. The divorce process was going smoothly. John's lawyer, Mike McGregor, was filing for divorce based on adultery and abandonment. He was also suing Eric for interfering with John's marriage and taking legal action against Sandra's employer for not upholding their moral standards. Mike mentioned possible additional charges against Swagman based on evidence from George. Bob mentioned that Sandra had a meltdown when she found out she was no longer listed on John's military pay account and couldn't access his money. She also discovered her house keys no longer worked. Bob and his wife told her to go to her boyfriend for help. John focused on his recovery, finding some amusement in Sandra's situation. His physical wounds were healing, but he struggled emotionally, grieving for his fallen Marines and hurt by his soon-to-be ex-wife's actions. John learned to move around using a crutch and cane, and the doctors agreed it was time to remove his cast. He was cleared to drive an automatic. Back in his room, John saw an orderly hanging up his cleaned uniforms, now with sergeant's stripes. A doctor explained he had been promoted and was being discharged, with physical therapy arranged at a VA facility near his home. John put on his freshly starched green uniform, grabbed his polished boots, and used a wheelchair and cane to go to the day room. In the day room, John was surprised to see his parents, doctors, nurses, orderlies, and Lieutenant Colonel Arvin Johnson, his reserve battalion commander. John stood up with the help of his cane, surprising everyone, and shook Lieutenant Colonel Johnson's hand. The colonel announced John's promotion to sergeant, expressing pride in John's loyalty and abilities, and joked, "And may God have mercy on your soul," causing laughter. John's parents pinned the new stripes on his uniform, thrilled at the honor. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson then read a citation awarding John the Silver Star Medal for his bravery in Vietnam. On January 30th, 1968, as a fire team leader near Da Nang, John led his team against overwhelming enemy forces, continuing to fight despite being wounded. His leadership and courage significantly contributed to the defense of Da Nang, upholding the highest standards of the Marine Corps and the Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson pinned the medal on John's chest, thanked him for his service, and noted that his experience would be valuable for training troops. John's mother hugged him with tears in her eyes, while Bob wiped a tear and expressed pride. After packing his sea bag, John changed into a Class C uniform, short-sleeve khaki shirt and green trousers. He took a wheelchair ride to the lobby where his parents waited for a cab to the airport. At the airport, he got another wheelchair ride and gave the finger to some long-haired protesters who called him a baby ender. A few hours later, his parents wheeled him into his house. It no longer felt like a home since Sandra cheated on him, but he appreciated the privacy. His parents had stocked the fridge with beer and snacks, and his mother prepared his favorite dishes, including her famous lasagna. He changed into jeans and a t-shirt and put his gear away. At the bottom of his sea bag, he found a large Bowie-style knife he had found in Vietnam. The blade was rusty but clean and oiled, with a leather scabbard stamped with a winged creature holding a sword and the words "Marche au crève." He valued it and promised to find out its origins. He called his lawyer, Mike McGregor, and George to set up a meeting that afternoon. After a short rest, he checked on his pickup truck in the garage. It seemed in working condition, though he planned to do an oil change and tune up soon. After inspecting his place, he grabbed a beer and sank into his recliner. His leg hurt, so he relaxed and turned on the TV, eventually settling on a game show for background noise. He called Wilkins to let him know he was finally back. "It's about damn time you got back," Wilkins said gruffly. "When do you think you can start working?" John explained the situation with Sandra and what the doctor said about his physical therapy. "No problem, son. Take the time you need to handle your stuff," Wilkins replied. "If you need to go to court or see the doctor, that's fine. I'm just glad you're home. Most of these kids don't even know the difference between a brake pad and a carburetor sometimes. If you can make it over here sometime this week, I've got a little welcome home gift for you." "I'll do that, thanks," John said, and ended the call. At last, Mike and George arrived, so John let them in, shook their hands, and offered them a beer. They accepted the offer and settled into the living room. "It's good to see you back, John," George said. "Your dad told me about your medal. Congrats, you earned it. Anyway, let's get to it. I've got something you need to hear." He pulled out a small reel-to-reel tape recorder with a tape already loaded. "Let me set this up for you," he said. "I've been keeping track of Sandra and Eric from the start. I followed them one night to a steakhouse on the edge of town and managed to sit right across from them. I'm not sure if they saw me, but they didn't notice the microphone hidden in the plants between our booths. There will be some background noise from waitresses and such, but you can clearly hear their conversation. He started the tape and turned up the volume. "So, Sandra, have you thought about my proposal?" said a male voice John recognized as Eric's. He could almost see the smug grin on his face. "I'm not sure I can do that to John, Eric. It's bad enough that I cheated on him and now I'm carrying your baby, but I don't think I can go through with this," Sandra replied. "Come on, babe. If anyone can do it, it's you. He's probably drowning his sorrows right now." "I bet he'd do anything to have you back," Eric said. "You don't know John very well, Eric. His sense of ethics wouldn't let him accept this. There's no way he'll agree to raise the baby as his, and he definitely won't share me with you," Sandra said. "No, he wouldn't share you. We won't let him. Look, you know I'm not cut out to be a father. John would be a better parent than me. Here's the plan. We get him to agree to our terms, or we threaten him with a divorce. We'll demand his house, half his income, alimony, and child support. Don't worry, I've already prepared the paperwork," Eric said. George stopped the tape. "So, they really think I'm going to let her stay with him and let him raise her illegitimate child?" John asked. "Are they out of their minds?" "There's more," George said, starting the tape again. "I don't know, Eric. John won't go for that," Sandra said. "Come on, babe. You know he's so in love with you, he'd do anything," Eric said. "You're not still in love with him, are you?" "Well, I still like him," she said. "But I don't love him like I used to. Besides, you're much better in bed." John's face turned red with anger. This is what I get for loving that cheating woman, he thought. "And I wouldn't leave you to go to Vietnam." "What kind of fool does that?" Eric said. John felt like punching the wall. "You're right," she said. "When he gets back, I'll talk to him. Okay?" "Do that," Eric said. "Do you know when he's coming back?" "No. I haven't heard from him since January, and I haven't sent him anything since last year like you told me," she said. "If he really wants to fight this, we have other options," Eric said. "Like what?" Sandra asked. "Well, you know how sometimes houses can catch fire out of nowhere? Or how brakes can suddenly fail?" Eric said. "You're not going to hurt him, are you?" Sandra asked. "I won't be part of that." "Don't worry," Eric said. "I know people who could help with that. You'd be in the clear. If something happens to him, you'd get everything and be free of him." "Well, I guess," Sandra said, "but only as a last resort." "Right. Only if we have no other choice. Let's see what happens when he gets back." George stopped the tape. "That sounds like a plan to commit murder to me," John said. Both George and Mike agreed. "It's also a conspiracy to commit fraud, and possibly theft since Sandra drained your bank accounts," Mike said. "That's why I filed the court papers on the way over and pushed for a quick hearing. I also got an order of protection that keeps them at least 100 feet away from you, your house, and your parents. I know the person who schedules these things, so I'll be serving them with papers tomorrow morning. I spoke with the district attorney, and he's putting together a criminal case against them. I also talked to Lee Marcus, the senior partner at their firm. We've been friends for a long time, and he's furious about what they're doing. I told him we plan to sue the firm and mentioned the conspiracy to engage in criminal activity. By the time we're done, swagmen will be lucky to avoid jail," Mike said. "Your dad and I still have connections in the police department, including the chief," George said. "I spoke with a few of them, and they've agreed to keep an eye out for you." "Any questions so far?" George asked. "Yeah," John said. "What am I asking for in the divorce exactly?" Mike handed him a folder with all the documents. "Sorry, I forgot your dad was acting on your behalf," Mike said. "Here's the paperwork. As I mentioned, we're filing for divorce based on adultery and abandonment. Since Sandra has a higher income, there won't be any alimony. You'll keep the house and everything in it because she left it and didn't pay any of the utilities. We're also demanding that she return $7,100, which is half of your joint accounts. Remember, she emptied both your checking and savings accounts and took all the money you had deposited. We're also asking that she return her rings and change back to her maiden name. She'll keep her clothes and her car. I've asked Lee to keep her employed, since she'll need some support during her pregnancy. From what we know, Swagman has just under $1 million, so we're suing him for $800,000. With that, his court costs and attorney fees for both this case and any criminal charges, he'll be nearly bankrupt. We're also asking the firm to pay $2 million for not enforcing their morals clause," Mike said. "The firm will probably settle for around half that amount to avoid bad publicity." "One last thing, John," Mike added. "Do you have a set of dress blues?" "Yeah," John replied. Mike nodded. "Great," Mike said. "Get them cleaned and have all your medals and ribbons mounted. Wear them to court when the trial starts. I want everyone to see what kind of man Sandra and Eric have wronged. I have one more surprise for them, but I'll keep that to myself for now." "That's fine with me," John said. "I'll get the uniform ready. Just let me know when I need to be there." "I will. Now, if you don't mind, I have a meatloaf and an apple pie waiting at home." "John, take some time to relax," Mike said. "I will," John said. "I was thinking about going to the watering hole for another beer and catching up with some old friends." "Just be careful, John," George warned. "That neighborhood has gotten a bit rough since you were last here." "Not rougher than Da Nang, I bet," John said. George and Mike laughed. "Not quite," George said, "but almost." After George and Mike left, John went to his bedroom, changed his shirt, and grabbed the knife, hoping to find a friend who was good with them. He locked up the house, hobbled to the garage, and started his truck. "Man, that feels great," he thought, as the pickup roared to life. He drove off and headed to one of his old hangouts, stopping for gas on the way. He parked in front of the bar like he always did and took a look around. George was right. The place seemed a bit rougher than it did a year ago, but he thought, "I've seen much worse." He went inside and made his way to the bar through the haze of cigarette smoke. He grabbed a beer and scanned the room, hoping to recognize someone, but no luck. This used to be a spot where regular guys like him would hang out and chat over a drink, but now it seemed like a hangout for gang members. He finished his beer and headed to his truck, hearing a woman cry for help in an alley. He saw a young woman surrounded by 5 or 6 men. Grabbing a knife from his truck, John quietly approached. One man was tearing the woman's dress. "Hey, leave the woman alone!" John shouted. The men paused, puzzled. One man with a switchblade moved toward John. John drew his own knife. "You want to play with knives?" John asked. The thug lunged, but John dodged, slashed his wrist, and kneed him in the groin. The rest of the gang began to retreat. 2 men stayed to confront John. He took one down with a punch to the throat and slashed the other from shoulder to waist. A man with a piece of wood snuck up behind John, hitting him in the face. The attacker fled as police arrived. An officer approached John. "Man, Harkness, didn't George warn you this area is dangerous?" "Yeah," John replied. "I guess I'm just too stubborn to listen." The officer surveyed the scene and instructed his partner to call for a couple of ambulances. He then grabbed 2 sets of handcuffs, went to the men on the ground, and restrained their hands behind their backs. Returning to John, the officer noticed the knife lying next to him. "Now that's a knife," he said. "Where did you get that, John?" "Picked it up in Vietnam," John answered. "Let me see it," the officer said. "Do you have a place to keep this thing?" John handed over the leather scabbard. The officer examined it closely. "French Foreign Legion? Really?" he asked. "Marine Corps," John said. "Just got back." "I know you were in the Marines, John. I'm talking about the markings on the scabbard. The emblem shows it's from the French Foreign Legion. The words under it mean march or die. This doesn't look like standard issue. I bet it belonged to a French soldier at some point." The officer put the knife back in its scabbard and handed it back to John. "You should put that somewhere safe before a tough cop takes it from you. Maybe frame it or something," he advised. John nodded. "Yeah, I'll do that," he said. The woman approached the officer. "Please don't arrest him, officer," she said. "He saved my life. These men were going to do something terrible to me." The officer looked at her torn dress. "It's all right, ma'am. He can go, but he needs to see a doctor, and we'll need a statement from you," he said. "I'll take him to the emergency room in my car, officer, and I'll give you my statement at the hospital. Is that okay?" she asked. The officer thought for a moment and then agreed. "All right, miss," he said. "You can follow me to the hospital." He shouted to his partner, who quickly came over. The second officer looked at the 3 men in handcuffs and whistled. "Wow," he said. "Isn't that Juan Mendoza, the gang leader we've been hearing about?" He was referring to the smaller man who attacked John first. The first officer nodded. "Yes, it is," he said. "And this guy took all 3 of them down?" the second officer asked. The first officer nodded again. "Looks like it," he said. "Unbelievable," the second officer said. By then, 2 ambulances had arrived, and paramedics were putting the gang members into them. The first officer helped John stand up. "So you didn't get enough of this in Vietnam?" he asked with a smile. John chuckled, even though it was painful. "Guess not," he said. "All I wanted was a beer with some friends." "Well, this lady will take you to the ER. Hand me your keys. My partner will drive your truck home, and I'll pick him up after I'm done at the hospital," he said. He pointed at John. "And stay away from this place. It's gotten rough. Drugs, gangs, you name it. All the guys are hanging out at the Rockwood on the other side of town these days." "Thanks, officer. I'll keep that in mind," John said. He followed the young woman, who introduced herself as Amelia Simmons, to her car, a small Dodge Dart. "Aren't you the guy who got a Silver Star in Vietnam?" she asked on the way to the hospital. "Yes," he said. "How do you know about that?" "Who doesn't? It was all over the news today," she said. "Why are you out here? Shouldn't you be home with your wife or something?" John couldn't hold back his tears and started quietly crying. He felt worse knowing that strangers seemed to care more about him than his so-called loving wife. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to upset you. What happened?" John briefly explained the end of his marriage, and Amelia began to tear up. She parked in the emergency room lot, found a spot, and hugged him tightly, not caring about getting his blood on her dress. John felt quite embarrassed by her gesture. "You poor man," she said, tears streaming down her face. "That awful woman doesn't deserve you." John looked at her, puzzled. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "Those men were going to end me. But you jumped in to help, even though you could have been killed yourself. You didn't even know me, but you risked your life for me," she said, crying. "I can never repay you for that." John hugged her back. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I owe you everything. You put aside your own pain to help me, so I'm going to help you heal. No matter how long it takes, I'll mend your broken heart," she promised. "I swear no one will ever hurt you again. Not like her," she said. "You don't even know me," he said. "You didn't know me either," she replied. "But after tonight, I know all I need to know. John Harkness, you're my hero, my knight in shining armor. I want to care for you, hold you, and fill the emptiness in your heart. Please, let me do that for you." John thought about what she said. When he looked into her eyes, he saw only genuine love, no deceit. There was something beautiful about her that he couldn't quite describe. Maybe it was because of everything with Sandra. In his mind, he heard Harker's voice. "Go for it, Corporal. Sorry, Sergeant." He smiled, knowing Amelia had no idea why. "All right," John said, giving her a gentle kiss. Amelia hugged him tightly. "You won't regret this, John, I promise," she said. They went into the hospital emergency room, where the officer waited while the doctor checked out both John and Amelia. The doctor cleaned the cut on John's cheek while x-rays were processed. After looking at the x-rays, he told John that nothing was broken and that the nail in the board had only scratched his skin. Amelia was also fine. John gave his account of what happened that night, and the officer seemed to accept it. "John," the officer said, "Amelia seems like a decent person, but she's had a tough time. Her parents died in a car accident a few years ago, and she's been struggling ever since. She has no family and barely gets by as a waitress. I know you have your own issues and don't need more problems, but it would be great if you could help her out. Maybe you two could support each other." "Thanks," John said. "Maybe you're right." He was surprised by what the officer shared. Amelia had never mentioned any of her difficulties, yet here she was comforting him. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe it was love. Whatever it was, it felt a lot better than what Sandra had given him. The officer handed him a card. "Call me if you need anything," he said before walking over to Amelia. "You can follow me to John's place. I need to pick up my partner anyway," he added. She thanked him and they left the emergency room. They drove to John's house in silence. John had a lot on his mind. His soon-to-be ex-wife had betrayed him, his Marine friends were gone, and now there was Amelia. John didn't believe in coincidences, but he couldn't help but wonder. They were both hurting, yet they chose to set their own pain aside to support each other. When they arrived at John's house, he invited her inside after the officers left. "Come on in, Amelia. I don't bite, and it's much more comfortable inside than in your car," he said. "I don't want to be a burden," she replied. John grabbed one of her bags from the car. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's no trouble. I have an extra room, and it's definitely safer than sleeping in your car." "Okay," she said. "I suppose you're right." After settling Amelia's things in the guest room, John invited her to the living room and offered her a cup of coffee. She accepted and made herself comfortable on the couch while he prepared their drinks. They shared their stories, with John explaining everything about his marriage and his service in Vietnam. Amelia did the same, sharing her own life story. She told John that her parents worked hard but struggled to make ends meet. They lived in an apartment when they died in a car accident, leaving her with nothing but the need to sell off everything she owned. There was no inheritance, and the little money she had went to covering her parents' final costs. She lost her job as a secretary when her boss moved away and ended up waiting tables at a small diner close to the alley where she was attacked. The pay was low, but she managed to get an apartment with a friend. Her friend, however, got a job in another state, and left. Amelia couldn't afford the apartment on her own, so she moved in with a guy she had dated a few times. Unfortunately, he wanted more than she was ready to give and started being abusive. After a few weeks, she left and ended up back in her car, trying to save enough money to rent a room somewhere. "Why don't you stay here?" John suggested. "I don't want to take advantage of you," she replied. "I can't pay you anything, and it wouldn't look good with your divorce situation." "That's okay," John said. "You can use the spare bedroom and maybe help me with some housework. If anyone asks about my divorce, I'll just say you were homeless and I let you stay in exchange for helping around the house." "That sounds fair," Amelia agreed. "I hope you don't get tired of me." John laughed. "No worries. I just hope you can handle looking at my face," he said, pointing to his cheek. She gently touched his scar and his left ear. "I can manage," she said. "Actually, I think it makes you look distinguished, like someone who doesn't put up with nonsense." He laughed again. "Flattery will get you far," he said. "Anyway, things might get a bit busy here for a day or two. Sandra and her boyfriend will be served papers tomorrow morning, so I expect a lot of phone calls after 9. I also have some errands to run. Want to come with me?" "Sure," she said. "That sounds like fun. I'm off for the next couple of days anyway." "Well, I'm exhausted and my leg is starting to hurt, so I'm heading to bed," John said. "I'll come with you if that's okay," she said, following him down the hall. "Would it be all right if I slept with you tonight? No closeness. I just need someone to hold me." "Sure," he said. "I promise I'll be good." She smiled and went to the bathroom to shower and change while John got ready for bed. By the time she returned, wearing just a long t-shirt, John was already under the covers. She climbed in beside him, and he instinctively put his arm around her. She rested her head on his shoulder with her arm draped over his chest. He thought to himself how nice it felt. They fell asleep and woke up the next morning with John spooning Amelia. "I'm sorry," he said. Amelia smiled at him. "Don't apologize," she said. "I put your hand there last night because it felt good. And this felt good too," she added, lightly brushing her hand against his groin. "I'm glad you like it," John said. They showered and got ready for the day. Amelia made breakfast while John got dressed. At 9:20 a.m., the phone rang. "What's all this about a divorce, John?" Sandra yelled. "I don't want a divorce. And what's this about adultery and abandonment?" "I don't care what you want right now, Sandra," John said. "You left the house, refused to pay the bills, took thousands from our accounts, slept with Eric Swagman, moved in with him, and now you're pregnant, either by him or someone else. Is that clear enough for you?" "I didn't know you were back, John, or I would have visited you," she said. "That's a load of crap," John snapped. "It was all over the news. Even people who don't know me have welcomed me home. But you? You're too busy with your boyfriend to care about your husband," he said. "You don't get it, John. I still love you," she said, crying. "No, you don't," John said angrily. "I haven't heard from you since last year. I learned about everything from my parents when they visited me in the hospital after I got hurt. You didn't even send a card. How can you claim you love me while you're sleeping with that loser?" "But I do love you, John," she insisted. "No, you don't," John said. "What did you tell that guy when you talked about me raising your child? Oh, right. I don't love him anymore. That's fine with me because right now I hate you so much I wouldn't help you if you were on fire." "John, how do you know what I said?" she asked through her tears. He had never talked to her like this before. "And you don't really mean that, do you? Just sign the divorce papers and let's be done with it." "We're over," John said. "And I'm going to take down your boyfriend, too." Suddenly, Eric came on the line. "Listen up, you jerk. I'm going to destroy you," Eric said. "I don't think so, idiot. Tougher guys than you have tried, and they're dead now. You want to mess with me? I'll beat you so badly you'll be begging for mercy. You'll feel like you've been hit by a freight train. Check those papers. There's a restraining order against both you and Sandra. I know you two plan to burn down my house and mess up my truck. If you come near me, you'll get a bullet up your rear end. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be lucky if you don't end up in jail," John said. "We'll see about that," Eric replied. Sandra came back on the phone. "John, please, let's talk this over. We don't need a divorce. Eric and I have a proposal we'd like to discuss with you," she said. "If you want to talk to my lawyer," John said. "Here's a suggestion for both of you. Go away and stay out of my life." He hung up and hit the wall with his fist. "Damn her," he yelled. Amelia came over and hugged him. "It's okay, John. She deserved that, and so did he. Let your lawyer deal with it. That's what you're paying him for. Just calm down, okay?" she said. "How can she still claim to love me after everything she's done?" John wondered. I don't know, John, she replied. She clearly isn't thinking straight. You mentioned you have errands to run. Let's take care of them and get out of here for a bit, okay? All right. You're right, he said. What do we need to do today? She asked. I need to visit my civilian boss, drop off my dress blues for cleaning and have the metals mounted, then get some parts and tune up the truck, he said. Let's get started then, she said. We've got a lot to do. First, I need to call my lawyer, he said. Amelia agreed, and John made the call. He updated Mike about his call with Sandra. Yeah, I thought she was going to faint, Mike said. And Swagman looked like he was about to hit something. I'm curious to see what they propose. By the way, I spoke with Lee. He's meeting with the senior partners and the board this afternoon. And make sure your dress blues are ready. We go to court next Friday. Got it. Thanks, Mike, John said. I'm dropping them off today. I'll call if I hear anything else. They left the house, took John's uniform and medals to the cleaner, who was an old WBOQ vet and knew his stuff. Then they went to visit old man Wilkins. Hey, boss, John said as he and Amelia entered. Wilkins looked up from his desk, buried in paperwork. Hey there, Wilkins replied. Damn, I need a secretary. I can't keep up with all this paperwork. I've got cars to fix. John glanced at Amelia. Seriously? You really want to hire a secretary? He asked. Absolutely, Wilkins said. Look at this mess. Plus, I have to answer phones and handle customers at the counter. I know someone who used to be a secretary and might be looking for a better job. Interested? John suggested. Hell yes, Wilkins replied. John gently took Amelia's arm. Let me introduce you to my new friend, boss. This is Amelia Simmons, and she used to be a secretary, he said. Wilkins looked at Amelia. Think you can handle all this, young lady? He asked. Amelia nodded confidently. Absolutely, she said. I can type 50 words per minute, file, take shorthand, and handle customers. I can even work the cash register out there. Wilkins thought for a moment, then asked, Are you working right now? Yes, I'm a waitress, but I don't make much, she said. Here's what I'll do, Wilkins said. Give your current boss a 2-week notice and then come work for me. Since you're John's friend, I'll start you at $125 a week. How does that sound? Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Wilkins, she said with a smile. Do you know anything about cars? He asked. Not as much as you, but my dad taught me quite a bit, she answered. That's even better, Wilkins said. Oh, John, I've got something for you. He handed John an envelope. Consider it a welcome home bonus. John opened the envelope and found a check for $2,340. He shook Wilkins's hand in appreciation. Thanks, boss. This really means a lot, John said. Well, you've earned it, Wilkins replied. Take care of that cheating wife and then come back to work, all right? Will do, boss, John said. Wilkins waved them off. All right, you two, get going, Wilkins said. They shook hands with the old man and left. Wow, $125 a week, Amelia said. I've never made that much. Thanks again, John. Don't mention it, John said. That's almost double what I make as a sergeant in the Corps. No way, Amelia said. Yep, John said. You really know about cars? Yeah, Amelia replied. We didn't have much money, so Dad taught me how to fix things. I learned to tune up a car, change belts and tires, and even do oil changes. Don't let Wilkins hear that. He'll have you working on cars all the time, John joked. Amelia laughed. I don't mind getting a bit of grease on my hands. Just get what you need for the truck and I'll show you how, she said. John smiled. Wow, I think I'm falling for you, John said. Amelia giggled and kissed him on the cheek. Me too, she said. They stopped at John's bank where he deposited the check, putting 10% into savings as usual. He took out $100 for spending and ordered new checks without Sandra's name on them. Then they went to an auto parts store and bought everything John needed for the truck. After grabbing a hamburger, they headed home. John thought about how the place felt like a home again with Amelia around. He pulled the truck into the garage and got everything ready while Amelia went inside to change. She came back out wearing old, worn jeans and a t-shirt. So, what should we do? John asked. Amelia grabbed the spark plugs and wires. I'll take care of the plugs and wires and you handle the oil change, she said. Sounds good, John replied. Do you know how to set the gap on the plugs? Are you serious? She asked. Without waiting for a response, she took the tools she needed and got to work. John was amazed at how skillfully she used his tools. He gathered what he needed and began changing the oil. By the time he finished, she had also replaced the spark plugs, wires, rotor, and distributor cap. He inspected her work and was very impressed. Everything looked flawless, but appearances can be misleading, so he lowered the truck and started the engine. He turned the key, and the truck roared to life just as he hoped. He revved the engine slightly and listened for any problems. Pleased with the results, he turned off the truck and looked at Amelia, who now had grease smeared across her hands and face. At that moment, she looked more beautiful to him than Sandra ever had. "So?" she asked. John took her face in his greasy hands and kissed her deeply. "I'm definitely in love," he said. "You're hired." She smiled, unconcerned about the extra grease on her face. He handed her his hand cleaner. He remembered a time he wished Sandra would enjoy moments like this with him, but she always thought his work was too messy. After they cleaned up, Amelia cooked dinner, and they enjoyed a peaceful evening watching TV. John felt more at ease than he had in a long time, and managed to get through the night without thinking about his soon-to-be ex-wife. The following days were a whirlwind. John picked up his dress blues from the cleaners and spent hours removing any loose threads, polishing his brass, shoes, and hat. Amelia gave her 2-week notice at the diner where she worked. She was informed that her employment ended immediately, and she was told to return in a few days to collect her final paycheck. During those days, John and Amelia grew closer and decided to hold off on taking their relationship further until after John's divorce was finalized. John found it challenging because it had been a long time since he'd been with a woman, but he was genuinely falling for Amelia, and it seemed she felt the same way about him. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. John showered, shaved, and dressed in his uniform after breakfast, then went into the living room where Amelia was waiting in a lovely printed dress. "Wow," she said, admiring him in his dress uniform adorned with medals. "You look fantastic," John smiled. "Thanks, but I feel like a Christmas tree," he replied. "You look amazing, too." At the courthouse, they were greeted by 14 Marines from John's unit, including Lat Col Johnson and Sergeant Major Roberts. After introductions, they entered the courtroom. The Marines filled 2 rows as John approached the table where Mike was waiting. John's parents also joined the Marines. John glanced over at Sandra and Eric at the opposite table. Sandra's eyes widened when she saw the man she had cheated on. Although he looked impressive in his uniform, she was taken aback by his missing ear and the scars on his face. Eric smirked while rubbing Sandra's pregnant belly. Sandra had yet to notice Amelia. The judge entered the room and the bailiff instructed everyone to stand. Once everyone was seated, the judge addressed the Marines. "What brings you here today, gentlemen?" he asked. Lat Col Johnson stood up. "Your Honor, my Marines and I are here to show support for Sergeant Harkness and, if needed, to speak on his character," he said. The judge acknowledged this with a nod. "Thank you, Colonel," the judge said. "I don't think we'll need that, but I appreciate the support." The Marines remained silent but cast stern looks at Sandra and Swagman throughout the hearing, which proceeded as Mike had described. The judge asked both parties a series of questions covering their marriage history and the reasons behind John's divorce request. Sandra admitted to abandoning the house, neglecting utility payments, and getting pregnant by Swagman, who then tried to convince the judge to order support for the child. The judge asked, "You really expect me to make Mr. Harkness pay child support for a child you fathered? Are you serious, or just not thinking clearly?" Denied. Throughout the hearing, the judge rejected every motion and request from Swagman. At the end, the judge ruled in John's favor, granting him everything he had asked for: the house, a permanent restraining order, and no support payments. Sandra was also ordered to return half of the money she had taken from their joint account and revert to her maiden name. She didn't need to return her rings as she had already thrown them away. Swagman protested, but the judge silenced him with his gavel. "Mr. Swagman," the judge said, using his gavel to point at him, "I am ordering an investigation into your involvement in this case. At the very least, there's a significant conflict of interest. And I know the district attorney is looking into other potential illegal activities, including conspiracy. I also understand there's a lawsuit against you for alienation of affection. Your actions and responses today will be considered in that matter." He hit the gavel on the desk. "Mr. Harkness's divorce petition is granted," the judge announced. Swagman jumped up angrily and charged at John, but was stopped by the bailiff. "You bastard!" Swagman yelled. "I'm going to kick your ass. I'll keep messing with your ex and anyone else you get involved with. I'll ruin you." "I don't think so," John said calmly. Swagman looked at John, then at the Marines in the courtroom, who were glaring at him and Sandra with hostility. Sandra looked down, embarrassed. Lee Marcus, who had been watching from the back of the courtroom, approached Swagman after his outburst. "You're fired," Lee said. "I'm also filing a complaint with the state bar. Pack up and leave my office by the end of the day." He glanced at Sandra as Swagman stormed out, cursing. You still have a job, Sandra, at least until after the baby is born and you've had some time to recover. We'll reassess your performance then, he said. He turned back to John and shook his hand. Thank you for your service, Sergeant, he said. On behalf of the partnership and the board of directors, I apologize for what you've been through. He then turned to Mike. Given the situation and considering Mr. Harkness's service, the board accepts your initial offer. We don't see the need for more hearings. Please make an appointment with me next week to finalize everything. Mike nodded as he and Lee shook hands. Thanks, Lee. I'll call on Monday, Mike said. Lee smiled. Great. Maybe now I can win back some of my money on the golf course, Lee said as he left. Amelia came over to John and hugged him. John hugged her back and noticed Sandra watching him through her tears as he ended the hug. John, I'm so sorry, Sandra said. I didn't mean to hurt you. Well, you did, he replied. I just want to know one thing. Why? Sandra shrugged. I don't know, she said. You were gone. Eric was around. Maybe I started thinking about money and was tired of being broke. One thing led to another. And, well, you know the rest. What were you two talking about? He asked. Eric thought you'd be okay with raising my child while letting me be with him, she said. I didn't like it at first, but the idea started to grow on me. Again, I'm sorry. John shook his head. I see you didn't waste any time replacing me, Sandra said, glancing at Amelia. Amelia stepped in front of John, looking ready to confront Sandra. I'm not here just to replace you, she said. I'm here to heal a good man's heart, the heart you broke, and I plan to spend the rest of my life doing that. Sandra looked down before responding. I guess I deserve that, she said. John, do you think we could ever be friends again? She asked. I'm not sure, Sandra, he replied. You hurt me deeply. If it weren't for Amelia and my family, I might not even be here now. I didn't know, John. I'm really sorry, Sandra said, crying. She turned and left the courtroom. John shook Mike's hand as he got ready to leave. By now, the other Marines and John's parents had gathered around them. Thanks for everything, Mike. I really owe you, John said. Mike waved him off. Hey, that's what friends and family are for, right? Mike said. Plus, I've always wanted to see that jerk get put in his place. I'll catch up with you next week after I talk to Lee. You got a big payday coming. Now go out and celebrate. You've earned it. After shaking hands with the Marines and gathering his things, Mike left. Good job, Sergeant, Colonel Johnson said, shaking his hand. The other Marines also shook his hand and wished him well. After they left, John's parents hugged him. We're so proud of you, son, his mother said. And who is this lovely lady? She asked. John introduced Amelia proudly, and his parents hugged her warmly as if she were family. You need to bring her over for dinner sometime, John, his mother said. John smiled. I hope to do that a lot from now on, he said. Sandra's pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and she was told she couldn't have more children. The firm kept her on under a contract prohibiting intimate relationships with staff. She worked there for 20 years and stayed single, occasionally watching John and Amelia's children. Tragically, she was passed in a car accident. John, Amelia, and his parents attended her funeral. Eric Swagman lost most of his money fighting legal battles. He lost to John in court and all appeals to the state bar. The district attorney didn't press charges due to insufficient evidence. One night, after leaving a bar, he was beaten by masked men, with severe injuries to his Johnson and a Semper Fi sign around his neck. Weeks later, he was found hanged. John proposed to Amelia the day his divorce was finalized. They married with a traditional Marine sword ceremony. They continued working for Old Man Wilkins until he passed away in 1980, leaving the shop to John. John remained in the reserves, retiring as a master gunnery sergeant in 1992, a year after Desert Storm. He occasionally dreamed about Vietnam, but managed it well. John and Amelia ran the shop until retiring in 2008, passing it to their two sons. 10 years later, while window shopping, John saw a drawing of the rose tattoo he had almost gotten in Vietnam. He decided to get Amelia's name tattooed over his heart. What are you doing? Amelia asked. John explained, I want your name right here, over my heart, where it belongs. You promised to heal my heart all those years ago, and you did. Now I want everyone to know how much I love you. Amelia's eyes filled with tears. You don't need to do that, she said. Oh, yes, I do, John said. I owe you everything. She sat down knowing that once John made up his mind, nothing could change it. Are you sure you want to do this, Grandpa? The artist asked. John took off his shirt. Absolutely, he said. Okay, the artist replied. Will it hurt? Amelia asked. Yeah, it's going to hurt a lot, John said. But it's worth it to me. Amelia smiled and wiped away her tears as she watched the artist tattoo her name on his skin.